What made a job candidate go from your best to your worst choice? Hiring a developer, I asked details about the languages he had on his resume. Oh, I don't actually know any of those, I put it on there to get an interview. The languages were obscure and he'd already passed the interview, and I was just genuinely curious how he had run into them. I walked him out immediately. He didn't get the job. I asked the applicant about their strengths, and they spoke about how result-focused they were. Going well so far, and then they started sharing examples of unethical things they did to get the job done, like bribing customers, sharing misleading information. Clearly, that was the end of that interview. My friend was doing first-round interviews and screening for a role when a guy from a dating app who had pumped, dumped, and ghosted just a few weeks earlier walked in from reception. Turns out he was using a fake name on his profile. She described it as an Abe Simpson moment where he walked through the door, had a sudden realization, did a 180 straight out the door without saying a single word. Well, at least he recognized her. It would be even worse if he had completely forgotten who she was. When I was becoming an assistant manager, I had to sit in on an interview. My boss took a look at the guy's resume and went into the usual line of questioning. At one point, he asked why the interviewee had left his previous job. The interviewee said he had quit. My boss then asked another series of questions which eventually caused this guy to slip up and say that he hadn't quit but rather he had been asked to leave. The interviewee got up and left once he realized he'd been caught in a lie. After he was gone, my boss turned to me and said something like, "You know, I saw the felony and alternative school and really wanted to give him a chance. He was doing fine until I caught him lying." Asked a warm-up question to an applicant and they went about it for 20 minutes without stopping or letting me interject to ask any of the main questions. At one point, I interrupted them and said something along the lines of, "Okay, that's great, let's move on to another topic," just to be told they weren't done. They hadn't gotten to the point yet, and then they proceeded to keep talking about the same thing for the remainder of the interview without me ever getting to ask any relevant questions. Ah yes, that valued skill that we all look out for in our hires, ignoring directives from above and steamrolling management when they try to put you back on task. I didn't think it was possible to try and filibuster in a job interview, but there you go. The candidate went on a 5-minute rant about his parents and how much he hated them. Not sure what set him off on that one, but crazy is not a good look. Good move. We had a guy in his 40s that we hired tell the room that he was going home to kill his parents because they decreased his allowance to $1,500 a month on top of paying his living expenses. The boss called the cops, the guy got pretty unruly, and the cops used their tasers. One day we were all talking about Walmart and this same guy asked what we were talking about. We thought he missed what store we were discussing, but it turns out he had no idea what a Walmart was. His parents were both successful surgeons or something like that, so he grew up extremely rich and didn't know about places like Walmart existing. I had an applicant tell me during the interview that her mother was outside and if she could now bring her mother in to chat some more. This applicant was interviewing for her first employment as a full medical doctor. I was going to mention something similar. I used to work at a place that was a bit far away and hard to find with little options for public transport. We were hiring for an entry-level position, so it wasn't rare that someone would show up with their mum or dad that drove them there for the interview, and having nowhere else to go, they'd be in the waiting room. That's understandable. One mum, though, did the speaking to the secretary herself, as in, "This is my daughter, we have an interview here today," and tried to enter the interview room herself and seemed annoyed that we asked her to wait outside. The girl herself wasn't bad, but since we had good options, we decided to go with someone a tad more independent. He spat into his hand and held it out for me to shake. What a rookie. He should know you're supposed to cut your palms and give a blood shake. We were interviewing for a comic shop sales position. This guy was going great. He has the vibe we like and he seems to really know his stuff. Then bam, he goes on a tangent about human puppers, puppy play, and the variations it can take. I'm not one to kink shame, but damn if that wasn't unprovoked. The panel asked him, "So, you put Industry 4.0 on your CV, so you have some knowledge about it."
Yes, I do.
"How do you think it could be applied here?" Cue 15 seconds of stupid face from the interviewee. So we ask again, "Where or how do you think it could be applied?" The interviewee starts spouting off some stuff about using CAD as if it was some amazing new thing. If you're going to put bullcrap on your CV, at least make sure you know something about the topic, like what it is for a start. I did some interviews for the help desk I worked at many years ago. It was some light technical questions followed by troubleshooting scenarios where you'd just walk us through how you'd solve a problem. One of the technical questions was, give an example of a browser plugin. The candidate proceeded to explain that a browser plugin was something you plugged into your computer to either sit on the monitor, like a webcam, or help you with your browsing, like a mouse and keyboard. They also missed all of the other questions we asked. On the plus side, they were very confident in the answers they gave us. I'm a young female software engineer, and I was interviewing this old-school 90s movie-type programmer guy who knew COBOL really well. I usually ask a tough algorithms problem, and I didn't really expect him to do well, but I was preparing to make the argument that he has so much real-world experience and could add some diversity to our collective skill sets and culture, so we should consider hiring him anyway. I start with an easy version of the problem, and it's fine, he doesn't do great, but I expected that. Then I start explaining the harder version of the problem, but before I could finish, he says the problems are exactly the same. I'm a bit taken aback, but I try to explain how the problem is different, and then he just starts yelling at me as to why he thinks the problem is the same. I sat down from the whiteboard and processed what had just happened in silence for a few minutes. If I felt I had the authority to end it there, I would have, but I didn't, so I attempted to continue. I work up the courage to start speaking again to try to help him, and as soon as the first sound comes out of my mouth, he immediately starts aggressively talking over me more of why he thinks the problem is the same and asks in a very patronizing tone if I understand what he's saying. My boss gave me the authority to just end interviews in the future if they're being a jerk. The guy I interviewed was checking out my wife and asked whether she was single. This isn't my story, but I know of someone who was part of a committee hiring a new professor. At the final stage, they had 2 candidates they liked, so they took them both to dinner individually. Pretty standard in academia. The first guy did really well, but after the meal, he picked up his plate and started licking it. Licked it clean. The committee was pretty weirded and grossed out. The second guy also does well, but eventually he asks, "So, what's the university's policy on dating students?" The committee was like, "Well, I guess we're going with the plate licker." I was doing a basic boilerplate interview in 2009 for an entry-level position. Everything was going well until my last question. I tried to keep the last one kind of fun, but also try to get an idea of how they view money since their job is handling thousands of dollars a day in cash. So I asked them, if you had $1 million right now, what would you do with it? The normal and boring answer is to invest most of it and spend a little on stuff. This person's answer, well, it wasn't that. So I'd put about half away for my retirement, and the other half I'd invest into buying as many substances as I could so I could resell them. I have plenty of contacts, and the return on investment is pretty good if you buy bulk. Needless to say, that's a bit of a red flag. This is because people try and steal the daily deposit and buy and resell substances that night and then complete the deposit in the morning. It happens much more than you'd think. Assistant manager here. I was interviewing this one young man, and he was doing solid till he said, "Man, that coworker of yours, I want to knock boots with her." Much like a video I did recently where we talked about bad first dates, I feel like we should appreciate these really bad applicants for showing such obvious signs from the get-go, rather than waiting until they're hired before destroying your office from within. I don't know how we should reward them, but I've got to say they're more preferable. My first professional job was an HR manager at a small factory. I was interviewing an applicant for a job in our quality control unit. During the interview, his cell rings and he stops the interview and takes the call. He ends the call and then tells me he just got another job offer and accepted the position. He proceeds to tell me his buddy is in the lobby and would be perfect for the job he was interviewing for with us. He wanted to get him to take his spot at the interview. I couldn't believe what I'd just witnessed. I declined to interview his buddy as he had not applied for the job. Some people are unreal. I don't interview applicants myself, but for one job they'd interview 2 of us at the same time for the same position, which was worker at a gas station. They asked questions, and for one I could answer first and then he'll answer the next one first, and so on and so forth. It's my first job interview ever, as I'd just finished high school, and the guy I was up against was more qualified in every way. So one question was, what would you do if you'd found out that our station manager is stealing stuff from the station or selling them to put money in his pocket? I said I'd report him to his supervisor. This company has a chain of stations in the country, and for every region there is someone who supervises the specific region. The same way we workers answer to gas station manager, he has to answer to his regional supervisor. They explained this all when they introduced us and told us about the company. The other guy's answer to the question was, "I'd blackmail the manager that if he doesn't include me, I'd report him." I'll finish with the fact that I was the one who actually got the job. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My department is a very male-dominated one, and I'm the only woman. I'm also the second stage of any interview to join us. It goes like the team leader talks to them, then I do, then the grand boss does. This one guy passed the section of the interviews conducted by men with flying colors. He then spent the entire section led by me staring at my chest. I was wearing a frickin' turtleneck. He was newly graduated, so we gave him some feedback about appropriate interview conduct, and then hired a different candidate. It was going well until she suddenly said, "I don't know why people think interviews are so hard. Like, all you have to do is be normal for 10 minutes, just don't talk about your downstairs herpes or whatever other transmissible disease you have." This was an interview for a residency position as a doctor. Not sure where she ended up, but it wasn't with us. An in-person interview for a copywriting position at a tech company. It went great until they asked me how much money I wanted. I'd never been in a position to negotiate before and was still fairly new to the industry. I had zero idea what my market value was, and they wouldn't give me a ballpark. I tried to play it off and say that I was more interested in the opportunity than the money, but they insisted that they needed a figure to work with and that they wanted to pay me fairly. I said some number that was in retrospect way too low, and the what the frick look on their faces just said it all. I could tell they weren't going to call me back after that. It would be like a software engineer sitting you down and telling you that $13 an hour sounds about right. You'd think something was seriously wrong with him or his work. My personal favorite, I said, "Can you tell me about a time you were faced with an irate or difficult customer?" The applicant told a story of working airport security. They encountered a traveler from the Middle East, there was a language barrier, a misunderstanding, and they tased the individual. Even the way they told the story couldn't make it sound like they were the one in the right. On top of that, they used racist language, including the N-word. Thank you for your time. About 20 years ago, I was working at a vocational school. New instructors were required to give a sample lecture as part of the interview process, and the other instructors would be the audience. We'd let them talk for a bit and then start interrupting with questions, easy ones at first and then getting harder until we decided they'd had enough. Usually they were judged not by their answers but by how they handled the question. One day we had a guy who chose to lecture on computer hardware. He started off okay until the questions started. When my buddy reached into a box, pulled out a hard disk and said, "What's this?" and the guy couldn't answer, the interview ended soon after. This one guy complained about how there were too many poofters at his current job in retail. I asked him to repeat himself and he laughed and said, "Well, you know what they're like." You should have seen the look on his face when I told him I was gay and I didn't think he'd be a good fit for the company. It's been 10 years, but it's so depressing to think that people think exposing their prejudices at an interview will help them. He started talking about anger management issues. We try to support mental health as much as possible, so this isn't an automatic no. We asked him how he copes with this. He said he shuts down, becomes withdrawn, and may be rude to colleagues and customers. Yeah, that's a no from me. This lady took a pass at the boss's husband and then turned to her and said, "You did well." Obligatory, not me, but a friend. She was interviewing to work at an animal shelter and was told at the end of the interview she basically had the job. When she went back to her car, there were cops around it and all the employees were out in the parking lot panicking. She'd left her dog locked in the car in a hot day. She never heard back from that place. Oh my god, that's really unfortunate. Lesson learned, I hope? It's entirely possible that we can pin this down to stupidity rather than not caring about her dog, but even if she was the most angelic, perfect person in the world, she had to have looked at this situation and said, "Yeah, you know what, I can see why I didn't get this one." Basically, they said all the right stuff, but were taking a while to answer each question. Then I noticed them texting someone. Turns out they were asking a friend for all the answers. Immediately turned them down. But that's some serious stealth texting though. I was interviewing someone to replace me in a finance position. Things were going well until I gave her a scenario and asked her how she'd turned that profitable. To which she replied, "I think if we don't reach that stage, we'll be fine." This soon-to-be college grad had passed 2 phone screens and was in the office going through our panel interviews for a software position. One of my engineers who was scheduled to interview him next came to my office. The engineer had decided to take a deep dive through the candidate's GitHub repos, a software engineer's public portfolio for you non-techies, as the basis for questions. The candidate was a person of color, but some of his personal projects were littered with incredibly derogatory and inflammatory language. Like multiple variables were variations of the hard R N-word, as well as LGBT slurs. I stopped the interview right there, walked him out, and sincerely encouraged him to clean up his public repos before applying to any other companies. It sucked too, because we all liked him and he was technically capable, and it seemed like it was just a dumb college kid's mistake on personal projects that he thought no one would ever look at. However, we can't risk anything like that happening in any of our code, and you never know what underlying issues could have caused those inclusions that the candidate needs help for. Hopefully, it was a wake-up call for him. Hiring for a writer position in legal marketing, looking at law students who usually jump at the opportunity because it's remote, pays well for a student, and can be done on their own schedule. One candidate had some pretty decent experience in the field we were looking at, not a bad personality it seemed, and took a funny question in stride. Then, when he was asked about his writing experience, stated, "I'm not really a strong writer, I don't really like it." This was for a writer position. Doesn't like writing. Isn't good at writing. She seemed nice, and then she said, "One of my references is going to say really nice things about me, you'll see. She's my best friend, my high school guidance therapist." This lady was 24. Then she claimed she'd need a month off for her honeymoon. He hadn't proposed yet, but she's gone over to his house on the first date, so it's getting serious quickly. We respectfully didn't hire her. There was this one guy I liked, but my boss didn't. I would have hired him though. He said he was lazy, probably more lazy than anyone they'd ever met. But he was also driven and a bit of an expert in his area. This means, in his words, that he'll always find a way to do a task faster and with less effort, but with better results. I was interviewing a guy for an IT job at a healthcare-related company a few years ago. Things were going great until the end of the interview when he informed us that something was going to come up on his background check, so he was just going to come clean about it now. He proceeded to tell us that he was fired and prosecuted for stealing intellectual property and company confidential data. Needless to say, we didn't end up hiring him. Application was really good, phone interview was going well, open availability and eager to start. We used to ask, "Can you pass a substance test and a background check?" It's not a question we ask anymore, but one applicant back in the day responded with, "Due to some questionable life choices over the weekend, I won't be able to pass either for the foreseeable future." This phone interview happened on a Wednesday. Happened about a year ago when I was 21 trying to grow a telemarketing team for a tech startup, mostly interviewing people around my age, maybe a few who were a couple of years older. But then I interview a man who was over double my age, and the whole interview was him trying to ask me questions about my role, my experience, and my age. I understand it was probably a shock for him to be interviewed by someone so young, but it was even more off-putting for me. He didn't really fit with the vision of our team, but we did have another position we looked to put him in, but that position was then filled by someone else as well. I interviewed for a job and it went well. Well, up to the point where I asked about the hours. The interviewer said that they started at 8:30, but most people were in the office by 8. He tried to make out that this was a good thing as they had a committed team. I was offered the job, but I turned it down because screw that. If they pay me for the hours I work, I'll work hard, but if they're going to try to squeeze extra from me right from the start, then screw them. Every retail job I had as a teenager was like this. Work starts at 5, but you have to be there by 4:30 so you can be on the floor at 4:45. But don't clock in until 5. Don't stand around waiting to clock in either. You have to be working. Work ends at 11 p.m., but you have to sit there for no reason until the cashiers cash out, and we all leave as a group for no reason. It takes about an hour. I didn't stay there long. I tell every young person I know to tell the boss they won't be taken advantage of like that and to quit on the spot. Learn to stand up to that crap when you're a kid and you can afford to quit. From some of my experience, I've learned don't make jokes. You can try to make something funny that's already happened, but don't go stand-up comedy mode. You'll probably flop. I can tell a story from my mum, who in her career did some interviews. Everything went well until the interviewed person repeatedly said the word internship wrong while applying for an internship. At first, she thought that person just made a mistake, but then she began to realize that he genuinely didn't know what an internship was. Okay, English isn't my first language, and I don't know how you could say internship wrong, but in my language it's practicum, and the person said praxis. These words don't really sound the same, but come from the same family. In the police, we had one applicant who did well during the fitness test and the interview board. Prior military and a 4-year degree as well. We put him at the top of the list and was slotted for the next academy. During the polygraph, he lied about the animal mistreatment questions. When we asked him about a possible error, he told us that he used to have, relations with his female German Shepherd. He was not hired for obvious reasons. What is the most disturbing thing you've overheard a parent tell their kid? Heard someone get really mad at their kid, who was 7 or 8, in the grocery store, and they screamed, "This is why your dog ran away. He hated you." Like, geez, lady, chill. I wish you were never born. In a grocery store, after a small child was acting up. I was leaning against a telephone pole at a bus stop, just waiting for a friend to meet me there, and then walk to my place. A woman and a little girl were sitting at the stop when a car pulled up. The lady stands up and looks at the little girl and says, "If I'm not back in an hour, call your grandma and tell her I said for both of you to get out of this town and disappear." Then she got in the car and it drove off as my friend came around the corner. I dated a girl in high school who was adopted. One day I was at the mall with her and her mother when they started fighting and her mother yelled, "Well, now I know why your mother put you up for adoption." It was pretty much the worst thing I've ever heard. This guy I dated had an adopted sister and his mum said the same stuff. She called her a little hussy as well. I was helping my dad fix one of his rentals. The toilet was plugged up and we found out that it was clogged with numerous action figures. My dad asked the renter's child if he was the one who put them in the toilet. To my surprise, he admitted it completely and apologized. Immediately, the renter dragged her kid by the arm into another room. We could hear everything said, which should have been obvious to her. She said, "Don't you ever betray you or yours again. If someone asks you if you did something like that, you say no. You understand me?" Ugh. Not me, but my mother. At the elementary school we worked at, there was one mother who constantly bullied her son, including pinching him over the slightest things, blatantly favoring his siblings over him, and making him walk to school in the rain. My mum reminisced how she rarely saw the kid being happy. One afternoon during my mum's parent and bus pickup duties, she observed the kid's mum picking him up from school and yelling at him, as usual. Through tears, he asked his mum why he couldn't just go live with his dad. "Then you don't even have to see me anymore. Why can't I go stay with Daddy?" And her answer? "Because he wants you," before slamming the door and driving off. I still don't understand how that woman never lost custody of him. Out of all my children, you are the biggest disappointment. Oof. I sincerely hope you are listening to Lucille Bluth, because that's the only person with whom that statement has any chance of being remotely funny from. And even then, only if she was talking to Job. But seriously, that's freaking tragic and probably broke a kid. Not really public, but when I was in high school, I was at my best friend's house hanging out. He got in an argument with his mum and she got so teed off that she said, "I honestly wish I didn't have to put up with your bullcrap. You're only here because of divorced whoopee." Meaning he was conceived when his parents did the deed after their divorce. I was sitting there in stunned silence as she storms off. My friend just starts laughing as if it's the funniest thing he's ever heard. He would even proudly tell people that he was here because of divorced whoopee, with this big grin on his face. Just had this happen today. Hold the dog's leash or I'll strangle you with it. This was said by a father to his 5-year-old kid. The dog was a youngish-looking German Shepherd. My son has hydranencephaly, and his head is a little larger than normal because of a buildup of CSF fluid. Once at an appointment, a kid in a wheelchair, probably 5 or 6 years old, said quietly and innocently to his dad, "Look at that kid's head." And his dad replies, "Don't talk about him, you're in a wheelchair." Now, I'm all for parents using my son as a teaching opportunity to break stigma on special needs kids, or educate their kids on how to speak politely, say hi, or ask a polite question about special needs people, but I was shocked that this kid's dad said that to him. Don't make me regret not going to the clinic. We were getting in line to get ice cream when I noticed $20 on the ground. I asked if it belonged to anyone. A middle-aged woman and a teenage girl, presumably her daughter sitting near us, noticed. The mother nudged the daughter and said, "I think that's yours." And the daughter didn't even look away from her ice cream and said, "No, it's not." The mother presses on, saying, "Are you sure? I think it is." This back and forth continued. Clearly it isn't hers and the mother wants her to take the $20 anyway. Eventually the kid gives up and agrees, saying she thinks it's hers. Taking the $20 wasn't what bothered us, it was insisting your daughter do the wrong thing even when she clearly doesn't want to lie. I overheard a father shout, "Stop crying. Why do you always have to make everything about you? Everything is just the worst thing ever, isn't it?" at his hysterical toddler. Today. If you get hurt, you're in trouble. If you get in trouble, I'm gonna hurt you. The other day, the couple that lives in the apartment downstairs from me were outside trying to get their kids to be quiet and get in their car seats, but they were crying and arguing. The dad was going on with the "shut up, stop crying, stop yelling" stuff, but it was only making them worse. Then the mum really calmly walked over to the door and said, "I'm tired of you two fighting. I don't want 2 kids anymore. If this is what having 2 kids is like, I don't want 2 kids. I'm giving one of you guys up. You'd better decide which one of you is staying." That shut them up, though. I should clarify that when I say it's disturbing, it's only really messed up out of context, and I kind of understand why she'd say that. Honestly, I thought it was pretty funny. Was at a ghetto CVS, and a parent told her child something along the lines of, "If you keep crying, I'm going to pull out a piece and shoot ya. If you don't shut the frick up, I'm going to beat the crap out of you." This was on base, and the man was yelling into his car. I'll always regret not calling the cops. A father telling his preteen daughter how she was going to grow up to be a hussy just like her mother. She couldn't have been more than 11. On the train around early December last year, I overheard a father shouting at his, couldn't have been much older than 6, son, and threatening him with, "Santa won't bring you any presents if you keep acting like a little crapbag." To which the kid replied, "How can you make Santa do that?" And the father, kneeling down to make eye contact with his son, said, "I'll wait for him to come down the chimney, and then I'll punch all his fricking teeth out, that's how." I'm sure the son loved both Christmas and his dad after that. My fiancé and I were at dinner last year, and we were seated next to this really bizarre-looking family. It was busy and tables were jammed close, so we heard everything they said. The daughter had to have been around 13, and was carrying a little kid's stuffed animal and holding it the whole time. The mum wouldn't let the daughter order what she wanted and started body-shaming her kid, who was skinny but clearly going through puberty, telling her how disgusting and fat her hips were starting to get. Mum, by the way, was morbidly obese. Of course. So the girl ended up having to split a salad with her dad, while her slightly older brother had like 3 plates full of food sat right in front of him. What do you even do when you witness unfolding childhood traumas like this taking place right in front of you? This is actually mortifying, and I would love to know in the comments, even if I never end up running into any of it myself. I heard one of my old neighbors say to her son, "If you keep crying like a little B-word, I'll put you in a dress." You want to wear a dress? No? Then shut the F up. I was outside gardening with my daughter, who was about 6 at the time. Her eyes just went wide and she asked me why she would talk to her kids like that. I didn't really have a good answer. I was at Kroger browsing through an aisle. 2 young men were there with an older man, I'm guessing their father. One of them was talking about how he beat the crap out of his girlfriend recently and how he felt like a terrible person about it. The older gent put his hands on his shoulders and says, "Son, boys will be boys." I always tell my 1-year-old I'm going to give her a knuckle sandwich if she whacks me with her maraca again. Then she laughs and donks me on the head with it. Threatening to bite her little toesies off doesn't work either. "Stop mucking about, you little C-word, or I'll frickin' thrash ya." A mother talking to her child while walking them to school in front of all the other kids and their parents. This was in a low-income neighborhood in Australia. I used to work in a kindergarten and we had a kid around 3 years old who wouldn't and mostly couldn't talk yet. He said a few words at home, but while in kindergarten he only made noises and gestures to get us to understand, but was making progress and we were getting medical help at the request of the mother. At this time, it was popular between the older kids to go to each other's places after kindergarten, and this kid really wanted to join that, but the mother's answer? "When you start talking to your friends, you can go to their place after kindergarten." And no surprise, all our progress was lost, and he locked himself in even more. I was in shock. I just couldn't believe what I'd heard. This woman was so unhappy with her son not talking, nagging day in and day out that we must help her, and she just throws every piece of progress out the window. It was so sad. This actually was just said to me. It happened last year. I'm a dancer and I used to compete on teams and as a soloist. I don't really compete anymore, college, you know? One day I was competing my solo and just touching up my makeup in the dressing room where I accidentally was in the way of a mum and her daughter who was my age. I said, "Sorry, I'll be out of your way in a second," and the mum said I was totally fine and something about sharing a bathroom with siblings. I laugh and say, "Oh yeah, I get you. I have 3 younger siblings myself." And the mum says, "Really? I would have stopped after you," right in front of her kid. I smiled uncomfortably, grabbed my bag, and moved to the other side of the room. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My first job in my small little town in Australia was manning the toy section of the local Target. It was a lower-end suburb, so there was a pretty big Indigenous population that stayed in the area. Most of the people actually working at the Target were either white or some suitably civilized shade of brown. Anyway, what I'm saying is everyone working there was slightly racist and would pay a little more attention to anyone Indigenous who happened to walk in, to reduce shrinkage, of course. So one day I'm in the toy aisle rearranging all the Barbie dolls that some idiot kids had taken off the shelf and abandoned in homewares when this Aboriginal lady walks by with her daughter. The girl couldn't have been more than 8, and like any 8-year-old, she naturally makes a beeline for the Barbies and picks one up to look at it. Her mum, who let her hand go for a moment, yells, "You put that down or they'll think you're stealing it," and grabs the girl by the hand and walks off. I felt like crap, not the least because that B-word Sandra, who manned the front of the store, had been quietly trailing the two of them since they entered. Imagine being surrounded by that level of hostility your entire life, that you have to pass wisdom like, "Don't pick stuff up from the shelf or people will think you're stealing," to your kids. People who think Indigenous Aussies should just get over it have no gosh darn idea how bad it is for them in some areas. Made me ashamed to work there. Not someone else, but me. When I was 11 or 12, we went to Disney and my dad kept bugging me about why I looked so unhappy. I wasn't, I just have a resting B-word face. Eventually, we were at some chicken restaurant surrounded by tons of people and he called me an ungrateful B-word in front of about 30 people. Just a month ago, me and my boyfriend went to Disney World in Florida. While eating lunch in a quieter, more isolated area, we saw a dad drag his 8-ish-year-old daughter to a table near us and in hushed tones, but loud enough for us to hear, he said, "You don't deserve to be here, you ungrateful B-word." The rest of the family arrived shortly after with trays of food and the dad pulled out a tinfoil-wrapped sandwich from the mum's purse and threw it at his daughter while the parents and 2 other kids ate the burgers and fries from the quick-serve restaurant. I just felt sick and wanted to cry. I saw a 2 to 3-year-old kid lagging behind his mum. She turned to him and said, "Get up here, motherfricker." Wasn't super disturbing, just funny and kind of vaguely racist. I was iced in Birmingham, Alabama earlier this year. While I was getting some continental breakfast, a man walked up to the coffee dispenser with his daughter of about 4 years of age. He says to her, "Honey, always like your coffee how you like your men, light and sweet." Nothing like vague Alabaman racial bias instilled at a young age. I overheard a mother tell her son that he'd have to hold it in until church was over. The kid was obviously desperate to go and the preacher had only just begun his sermon, but the mother was intent on making him stay for the entire service. I'm the parent in this one. My son has one of those kitchen playsets and various toy or utensil or food items, and refers to playing with the set as home living. An awesome name for it he picked up at daycare. One day, during the height of his infatuation with home living, we were at a store and he wasn't following me, and he kept grabbing stuff off the shelf or was in general engaging in a behavior that I needed to correct him on. So I told him, "Son, you need to listen to me or you're going to lose your home living privilege." It pretty quickly dawned on me that without context, that must have sounded pretty concerning to people around us. That's wonderfully unfortunate. I wonder if you got glared out of the store by everyone in hearing radius. Who knows, maybe a kid as rambunctious as that would enjoy an evening out in the tent in the backyard. Honestly, the young narrator would probably have been thrilled at that prospect. Funny what'll interest a kid under 10 years old. I was in Walmart about 10 years ago. I saw the exact moment a woman grabbed her small son, about 6, by the arm as he was crying, and she shook him a few times while yelling, "Break yourself, fool." I was at a condo community pool and overheard children berating this Asian couple. The kids were straight up telling them to go back to China and using slurs. The Asian couple were infuriated and told the kid that he's being racist. They then turned to the mother, and instead of apologizing, the mother told the kids to continue what they were saying and that the Asian couple had no right to tell their kids off. I had no idea what was going on until I put the pieces together an hour after the event. It still makes me mad to this day. My dad used to be a police officer. I was at the grocery store with him, and a woman in line near us had a kid who wouldn't stop crying. She pointed in our direction and told her kid my dad would take him to jail if he didn't shut up. After a day of whale watching, my girlfriend and I stopped off in Buena Park to have dinner. We were sitting in a booth by a window where she could watch the rain. A homeless man came up the sidewalk pushing a shopping cart overloaded with stuff. She was wearing a halter top and stretch shorts, but it's California and not really cold out. As she's passing, one of her cart wheels hits something and her cart almost tips over. She frantically struggles to keep it upright and only loses the rolled-up blankets and some clothes. She was trying to pick up her stuff, but it wasn't easy with the rain coming down. I heard laughing and turned to see a family, mum, dad, and 2 kids, a boy and a girl, looking about 9 and 12 respectively, watching the woman and having a grand time laughing at her misfortune. Dad pointed at the woman and said something, making everyone roar with laughter, and then the daughter said something. I couldn't hear everything, but the parents were obviously teaching their children to look down and even ridicule the less fortunate. I guess this isn't that disturbing as much as it is what the frick. I once overheard a woman yelling at her toddler for crying. She said, "Shut up, why are you crying? You're acting like such a baby." I don't know which. Maybe it's because it's less than 2 years old and that's how it communicates with the world and lets you know something isn't right. I will not allow you to go to college. This person wasn't talking to the kid, but he was right next to her listening. I heard someone tell her friend that her kid would never move out and he'd be that loser living in his parents' basement all his life, right in front of him. To supplement that awfulness, anytime I did anything my mum didn't like I didn't clean something to her standard, she'd tell me what a loser I was and how worthless I was. I think that's why it bothers me that someone would say that to their kid. Just last night, at my significant other's very Christian parents' house, his mum said to their 27-year-old daughter who's dating for the second time in her life, "That sounds to me like you're pursuing him, and I don't like that." It was eye-opening. Pretty much everything in this thread is things my mother said to me as a child, or rather screamed at me, except the swearing. She'll never swear. Swearing is punishable by one heck of a beating in her book. Some of the things she thinks are more acceptable to say to a child than swear words include, "I've had enough of you, I'm putting you in a home," she'd pick up the phone and pretend to dial, or "Stop that noise or I'll beat you black and blue." In this case, I'd been crying because I was 4 and my brother had just thrown me, literally out of a bunk bed. I'd already told her this. Here's some others. "You're a B-word, no wonder all your boyfriends leave you. They find out what you're really like." I was a teenager when she said that one. "If it wasn't for me, you'd be starving on the streets because no one else would want you. If you don't stop complaining, I'm going to tell that policeman what you're like at home and he'll throw you straight in prison. Your friend's parents wouldn't put up with this behavior. They'd have got rid of you a long time ago." And so on and so forth, you get the idea. It wasn't like verbal, but once I saw a kid and his mum at a Toys R Us and the child touched one of the displays. His mother panicked at this and yanked his hand away and held it up in the air as she ran him over to the bathroom, presumably to wash his hands. It was so dramatic. "I brought you into this world and I can take you out of it," said my own mother on several occasions. As much as I can't stand kids, this teed me off. In a Walmart checkout line, go figure, some B-word looked at her 5-year-old and told him she'd strangle the breath out of your worthless butt if you don't shut the frick up. Was at the Science Center in St. Louis on Valentine's Day with my girlfriend at the time. We were walking across the covered bridge connecting the 2 sides and there was a mum with her child walking in front of us. He was maybe a foot in front of her when she screamed at the top of her lungs, "If you keep walking that far in front of me, someone is going to steal you," and just kept walking. The kid didn't even react, and the mum never closed the very small gap between her and her son. Most disturbing to me isn't the nasty or violent stuff, it's the subtle everyday things that bit by bit make the kid view themselves as a bad person. If you tell a child they're naughty or difficult or awkward or whatever every day for years, That child is going to grow up to be those things. It's why when I'm at work, I work in a preschool, I'm careful to chastise children's actions, not the children themselves, when they do something wrong. So there's a noodle place near where I used to live. It's basically a shack that the owners have to build from scratch every night when they open. Pretty third world, I know. Anyway, me and my roommates were having dinner when we overheard the owner of the noodle place saying something to her 2-year-old daughter sucking on a soda bottle. It was something along the lines of, "You better learn how to use your mouth like that now because you'll be doing it a lot when you're older." Me and my roommates stared at each other in disbelief. You have till the count of 3 to stop crying. 1 second passed. 3. The store went dead silent after that, and I never heard that voice again. Okay, this isn't something I heard, but it was something I saw, and it was pretty weird and quite disturbing. So I was working as a tourist informer, and then a woman came in with a young girl. She wasn't too young, maybe around 11 or 12, very quiet, quite normal looking, until I realized the woman was keeping the girl on a fricking leash. I'm not kidding. She had like those corsets with leashes that people put on their babies, but for a tween. Their mother just looked at the information and left the girl on the leash. I was like, what the cosmic eternal frick did I just see? What weird habits have you developed from growing up poor? I still can't bring myself to write in Mad Lib books, or on things that could be reused. Growing up ultra poor, it was a rare treat to get something frivolous, but Mad Libs were also semi-educational, so every once in a while I'd get a new Mad Lib book from my dad. But I felt a ton of anxiety about wasting them by directly writing in them. If I numbered the blanks and then wrote on a separate sheet of paper with the corresponding numbers, I could reuse the books over and over again. Being really poor made me live in this awful anxiety-driven state of don't use it up because you might not get any more anytime soon, and you'd better use it all and not waste anything, which made me overthink and overanalyze my actions. I was confronted by this preference to not mess things up in my master's degree program, because the professor would expressly tell me it was okay to write on the handouts because she'd share the digital copies with us, so we'd have a clean copy to use in our own classes later, and I still couldn't do it. Using plastic grocery bags as trash bags. Don't really see the point in using actual garbage bags. Anytime someone tries to buy me food or anything for me, I always go for the dollar menu or try to go for the lowest amount even if they say buy whatever. I mean, that's just courtesy. When people offer to buy me Starbucks, I order tea. It's the cheapest thing you can get from there. There's an expectation not to order the lobster equivalent on a menu when someone is being nice to you. Operating under a barter system with friends. Where I grew up, there wasn't much money. So people often bartered goods and services and often exchanged small handmade gifts as payment. Then I moved and discovered that wealthier people don't do that at all. Not letting anyone in the house. Even though I don't have to, as much, I still calculate how many hours I have to work in order to afford something to decide if it's a need or a want. Do I want to work 2.5 hours to fill my gas tank, or 2.5 hours to buy a single t-shirt? I want the shirt, but the shirt isn't going to get me to work. I really want a Switch and several new games, and I'll have to work at least 9 days to afford the Switch and the 3 games I want. And after I've worked those 9 days, I can't justify spending the money on the Switch and the games. The narrator finds that whenever they have a big expense on the horizon, or something they've been saving towards for a while, one starts to think of other purchases in terms of what fraction of the big spend they would equate to. It gets really hard to enjoy things like an annual gym membership when you realize it's 1/100th of an apartment deposit. It makes you value it more though, I guess. For a brighter side to this, the following commenter provides a counter-argument. This was a huge issue for me. My husband helped me realize that hours of enjoyment are worth something at least. What I did to get our Switch and 2 games is to save 2 days of work time per paycheck. I sacrificed some other things for entertainment and bought it for him on Father's Day. We don't have kids, but he is my puppy papa. After calling around to find the cheapest used Switch combo, we've already enjoyed it for hours more than I worked to get it. Also, our nieces think we're nothing short of gods. I legit cringe when I buy anything slightly expensive, and I find myself constantly buying the super cheap store brands instead of the name brand stuff. I mean, Costco liquor is literally made in the same plants as the name brand stuff. I dated a richer girl who told me she'd never had Chef Boyardee or SpaghettiOs before, but was disgusted by them. Apparently her parents had always told her, growing up, that canned food was for dogs. What the frick? Her saying that hit especially close to home, because I eat SpaghettiOs with a grilled cheese at least 3 times a week. My dad grew up even poorer than me, and he won't eat Chef Boyardee because it's so crappy. I like cheap wine. Even when my budget allows for a $75 bottle, I'll buy the $10. I still prefer thin, rough bath towels. Big fluffy towels are too fluffy. It feels weird when fluffy towels get wet. I grew up middle class and I hated fluffy towels. My mother would buy new ones every couple of months, and it drove me fricking bonkers to the point I just stashed my own supply of rough towels. The other day I was at a thrift store and I saw some towels in a pack and I brought them. $6 brought me 10 towels in what I consider to be perfect condition. After some hot washes with enzymatic detergent and borax, they were amazing. I love these towels. I'm not sure if it's odd or unusual, but my parents used to tell me, eat all the food served, since we were poor and sometimes they wouldn't eat so I could have a full serving of food. I'm no longer poor, but I still eat the full plate no matter how full I am. And yes, I'm aware that you can put food in the fridge for the next day, so it's not the most healthy thing either, but it's the flawed solution my parents found so I wouldn't be picky with the food or not eat on a whim. This really messed me up as a kid. Now I just go without and I eat leftovers from the plates of the kids I watch for friends and family. They think it's funny that I'm only hungry when cooking and when everything else is done. I hope they never figure out how poor I really am. Toast with butter and cinnamon is my favorite go-to for breakfast. Eating fast. I had 4 siblings and only so much food was made for dinner. If you didn't eat fast, you didn't eat. Yeah, I know the feeling. However, I learned to eat fast from prison. I haven't served time since '94, but I still wolf down my food to this day. It's a hard habit to break. I just buy 1 pair of trainers and I wear them until they fall off my feet. Then I buy a new pair. I make good money as an adult, but I still do this. I also don't buy branded clothes. I worked with a guy and we earned the same money, yet he collected limited edition trainers and drove an expensive car. I just couldn't comprehend the waste in money. I cycle everywhere because it's good for my health. I moved to Switzerland in a few weeks for a job that pays 2.5 times my current salary, and I still intend to cycle everywhere. I am, to this day, unable to manage my money. Going from not being able to spend anything to having at least $300 left for whatever I want made me spend recklessly. You'd think it would be the opposite growing up poor, but spending feels so good. This is fairly common. Most people in your situation will buy things since experience has taught them they don't know when they'll have money to spend things on again. So they end up spending it all, thus having no more money. I love Little Caesars $5 pizza more than fancy brick oven pizza because spending that gives me too much anxiety to enjoy the food. I was visiting my folks and my mum ordered pizza from Round Table, Southern California, and it came out to $64 for 2 large pizzas and 1 small. What the frick? Not having a lot of clothes. I can't stand a cluttered closet, and having more than about 3 pairs of shoes seems excessive to me. Ditto. I had 4 pairs of shoes once, and I felt like I was suffocating, but they were all necessary. You know, 1 pair for work, 1 for church, 1 for daily use, and 1 pair of gym shoes. Not filling up the gas tank because you might really need the money later. $10 at a time. Save another $10, that's food for a week just in case. There were 5 of us growing up, so we always had our good clothes and our everyday clothes. We changed out our good clothes as soon as we got home from school, and I still have this habit to this day. I changed out of my work clothes and into lounge around the house I don't care clothes as soon as I get home. The narrator does this too, but it's as much out of a desire, nay, a need to lounge on the couch in his underpants in a slovenly, disgusting fashion than any sense of self-preservation for his good clothes. Off-brand foods. So much cheaper. Love me a can of beans. If I have no dinner, no problem, I get a can of beans. They're also super healthy and food for your digestive system. You know what? I've gotten used to not having a bed frame, and I ended up using just the mattress and box spring and having old flat pillows instead of new fluffed up ones. I can sleep anywhere. Slept on the floor for a good couple of years, and I can handle heat pretty well because we didn't have AC. It was a one-window unit until senior year. Can literally watch anything and be entertained because we only had one local Channel 10 station. Saying all this sounds like I grew up in the 50s, but gosh darn it, this was all in the mid-2000s.
I still buy used clothes.
Me too. I try to say it's because I want to be environmentally conscious, but really, I just can't bring myself to spend more than $6 on a top. I eat a lot of frozen chicken pot pies. The crust is amazing. Lots of people mix it all up. I eat the crust last, but I hate crust on actual pie. I developed a dislike of wearing new shoes. I prefer old, worn-out shoes. The new pairs feel too rigid. Even though I have the money to replace them now, I still wear the same pair of boots I brought my senior year in high school. I'm in my mid-20s now. They've been worn through every crappy job I've worked through college, and in every office job I've worked since getting my degree. Through most of my good times, hardships, and adventures, they've been what's on my feet. It's an odd thing to get attached to, but when you've had them for years and they're broken in just right, they're a tough thing to replace. Keeping all of my clothes, even though I'll never wear them. I didn't have much growing up, so now I feel like I need to keep everything. A close friend grew up very poor and unsupported. Things were always a competition between him and his brothers, so he maintained that mentality into adulthood in many respects. Fast forward to us going to a Smash Bros tournament. He's egging me on while I'm playing the other people, but I'm sincerely supportive of him when he goes up for his own match. As we leave the store, he basically says, "Wow, I was a butthole to you while you were constantly cheering me on. I feel kinda bad now." He just prefers being competitive in nearly any aspect, though it's certainly gotten way calmer lately. I get freaked out if my pantry isn't full. It doesn't even matter if it's food I like, I just have this fear of not having food in the house. Not turning on the heater no matter how cold it gets, just layer up and lots of blankets. Saving every cent I can. I'm talking 80 cents versus 60-cent cans of beans, and never buying actual brand name anything. Pinching pennies never seems to leave you. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Mac and cheese with tuna. Cheap, but so good. I ignore the dates on a lot of food. The milk I smell just before I use it to make sure it's not sour. Constantly checking the bread for mold when I know it's past the date. Smelling the meat before I cook it to make sure it's okay. Unless something is like 6 or more months past the date, it's usually good. The expiration is just the warning that means you have to start checking it. This shouldn't be a poor thing. Food waste is so terrible, and most of those dates are either inaccurate or mean best before, which is about quality, not edibility. And with some things, you can pick or cut off the mold, like cheese. Maybe bad fruit in a bunch, cooking it more thoroughly or cooking it early to then eat a couple of days later. Buying cheap things and making peace with the fact that they will eventually break, it may not taste good or it won't fit me, instead of investing in something long-lasting. I can't travel. I'd love to, I could probably afford to now, but dropping any amount of money on a trip seems insane to me. I grew up never really going anywhere outside of a 3-hour drive and only stayed in hotels maybe about 3 times while I was under 18. It also feels weird to be in debt, but managing it. I have medical bills that I'm paying off, and credit card stuff, but it's all pretty manageable. Growing up, my mum constantly would get payday loans, and we had bill collectors calling non-stop about medical debt, and my mum maxed out every credit card she owned. So I was taught that debt was horrible and you could never get out of it. Also, I really love microwaved tortillas and cheese as a whole meal. That and lettuce, cheese, and ranch wrapped up in a tortilla. I think back on it though, and I'm really not sure how my parents raised me with how much they made. I make double now what both my parents' combined income was when I was in high school, and I really don't even make that much. Plus-sized women. The only skinny chicks in the hood were the working girls who did smack. You know, I never considered this aspect of growing up in a rougher neighborhood. I mean, that might just be your personal taste as well. But it sure would be interesting to do a study of some sort on it based on people from different backgrounds. Leftovers are my jam. I take home friends' leftovers. I have no shame. I can find a good way to reheat just about anything. Expiration dates are like yellow lights. The concept of selling a car is entirely foreign to me. We drive cars until they die so completely that even the junkyard doesn't want to pay for them. Keeping the lights off almost all the time, or biking everywhere. Only ever buying clothes if there's a really good sale. I never just go out to buy new clothes. I like fake maple syrup better than the real stuff. I love walking everywhere. If it's within a 60-minute walk, sometimes even longer, I'm that person that will walk and wants everyone to join me for the exercise and adventure, when everyone else is begging me to take a 5 or 10-minute Lyft or Uber. Heck no! Why would I pay for something when I can get exercise and have a pleasant stroll for free? It's just so nice to walk around and see your city. My friends will pay $5 for an Uber to not walk 5 minutes in the relatively okay part of downtown LA. But I enjoy walking around and seeing the buildings, people, hot dog stands, and random YouTubers, which I would normally have missed out on had I gotten an Uber and started scrolling Instagram. Little strolls make you appreciate the little things in life. I'll start with my own. I can't stand actual quality toilet paper. I can only tolerate the cheap sandpapery thin garbage. The nice plush stuff feels gross to me. We used to eat butter bread, which is just butter on one slice of bread folded over hot dog style. Still slaps to this day, I don't care. I'm plus-sized and losing weight quickly now. I've come to believe being fat in the first place, for me, has a lot to do with never knowing if we'd have enough food from week to week. Also, I grew up with the mentality of, if it's free, take it and take as much as you can. I used to enjoy just eating a tub of saltines, with butter if I felt fancy. My parents grew up poor, and we didn't rise well into the middle class until a decade into my father's career. It still shows. We always do leftovers and plan several meals around discounted food. Say a big piece of beef or turkey after the holidays. We'll have a nice meal and then eat nothing but turkey for about 2 weeks afterwards. Even now that my dad is well off, they don't buy new cars and their house is a construction project because they brought a teardown in a nice neighborhood. My siblings and I all play instruments, and all our instruments are second-hand or broken pieces my dad refurbished and gave to us as our birthday or Christmas presents. We also do joint mum and dad and grandma and grandpa gifts, laptops as high school graduation presents. When I was younger, my mum used to have a coupon book and she lived by it. But after my dad started making more, she just stopped. I also remember driving and never flying, like driving clear across the US because it was cheaper than 4 tickets plus a dog. Only buying clothes to go back to school, and then finding out that in the working world, this turns into only buying clothes for a new job. I don't like giving or receiving opulent, frivolous gifts. I always feel harshly like the money should be saved or spent on something practical. Eating cold food out of a tin. Not a problem. Conversely, hot cocoa made with water. I never take anything for granted. Even though I have a good job that pays 6 figures, I always spend frugally and have ample savings and a backup plan in the event that I should become unemployed. I don't waste money on non-essentials, and I try to make things last as long as possible, like cars or electronics, before I replace them. I secretly feel like anyone who orders any drink but water at a restaurant is insane. Even when my in-laws take us out, I order water because I don't want to take advantage of them. Not flushing the toilet. My dad said it was to save water. I flush water in public bathrooms, just not my own. Ugh, my dad used to do this. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to take a leak, lift the toilet lid, and be confronted by the odor of his fermenting pee. I like splurging when it's for something special for someone else. I hate buying something nice that I really want for myself, and worse when someone else goes out of their way to give me something nice. Canned green beans are better than frozen or fresh green beans. Change my mind. When people use 2 to 3 paper towels to dry their hands off when it can be done with just 1 sheet, or using paper towels at all, that's what hand towels are for. Dish rags were for washing dishes, and Dad's old white undershirts were cut into pieces for cleaning. Paper towels were a luxury right up there with paper plates. No spending money on stuff you're just going to throw away. Except toilet paper. Thank God my parents were never too cheap for that. Thank you to our authors for once again confronting the narrator with the truly rainforest butchering amount of paper towels he goes through on a weekly basis. I've really got to tone that crap down. I grew up with some money but don't have much nowadays. My family bought an old house and renovated it. I was involved there since I was about 10 years old, and I've always been interested in crafting and woodworking and such. I learned electronics in a specialized school for 2 years until I decided to do something else. So I like doing stuff myself. I know how to fix most electronic devices, so when I want something new, I just buy it as broken off eBay or flea markets and fix it. I don't remember what I paid for this 21-inch LG screen that I'm currently looking at, but it wasn't much because it didn't work. A capacitor for less than €1 fixed it. I do woodworking and build my own furniture, some at least, preferably with wood that others don't need anymore. I always cook at home and bake my own bread. And actually, I buy cheap, but usually stuff that's good quality. My latest is an old broken drill, Metabo. I paid €1 for it and it's already running again. People just don't know how to fix things and throw everything away once it stops working. Cold hot dogs are still one of my favorite snacks. Super cheap and quick, and it's basically a bologna tube. Also, not really a preference, but I'll never touch a random dog or walk up behind one without making myself known and asking the owner if it's okay. It seems obvious, but living in LA, people will grab or let their children pet strange dogs without even asking. Growing up, every dog was seen as a guard dog until someone said otherwise. Medicine, painkillers, and doctor visits are too expensive. If it isn't sufficient to interfere with work, then you deal with it. I'm between jobs at the moment. Recently went to a minutes clinic in CVS because I thought I had a blood clot. I was there for less than 5 minutes, turned out to be a large burst blood vessel. Cost me $140, and the next time I think I'll just risk dying. A Totino's pizza roll in the microwave is better than a Totino's pizza roll from the oven. Leftovers must be eaten. Food waste is not a thing in my house. If I have to throw out any food, I just think, well, that's money and a meal wasted. It makes me anxious and angry. Can't help myself though. I was starved as a child along with being poor and was homeless for a year. Food is everything. I'm not materialistic and I can't really relate to those that are. I don't send food back that is wrong unless it's disgusting. I'll eat what was given to me. I slept in my jeans because there was no heating in my childhood home until my mum remarried. I did this until I was 14 and I noticed that some of the blue denim dye had actually made my knees bluish-grey. I had to stop then. Doing a large load of laundry so I don't waste water and detergent on a smaller load. My mum used to get annoyed when we did a load but didn't fill it all the way because it wasted water. My boyfriend's mum doesn't understand why I let the hamper become full because she'll do a load that has 4 pieces of clothing in it. She basically washes whatever she wore that day the same day. Maybe she'll combine 2 days' worth of clothes. I know exactly how much I can put in the washer and have it be really full, but not so full that the clothes don't come out fully cleaned. Also, ramen. Loved ramen when I was a kid and money was tight, and I love it now. What was the most WTF thing that a customer brought into a second-hand shop? I worked at a weapon shop and a shady-looking guy brought in a few pairs of night vision goggles, like high-end military-grade PVS-14 night vision goggles. I asked him why he was selling them. Oh, I just don't need them anymore. Oh, cool, man. Do you mind if I call the company real quick and run the numbers? Sometimes this stuff is stolen property. As soon as I said that, he jumped across the counter, grabbed the goggles, and bolted for the door. A guy brought in a stack of about 15 laptops that all said, "Property of Cleveland Public High School," right on the top of each one. He then threatened to shoot me when I told him to get out. Okay, because people are asking, yes, I'm aware that schools and businesses can sometimes sell off old laptops, which is why I don't flat out call the cops when someone brings in suspected stolen items. There's always the chance that no matter how obviously stolen it is, the person owns it legitimately. However, I'm not going to risk my job or my conscience by taking an item if it has a label on it claiming it's someone else's property. Also, how am I supposed to sell a laptop that says "property of city, public schools" on it? Pawn shops have a bad enough rap as it is. I know a few guys who've run these sort of shops. One thing I've seen was a guy who brought in smoke grenades and M249 saw belts that he had stolen from our local military drill center. Another was a guy at a local weapons store who brought in a piece that had an illegal oil filter suppressor on it. They told the guy to get the frick out and go destroy that thing. A buddy of mine worked at a pawn shop for a few years. They had a guy try to sell them a police walkie-talkie, like straight stolen from a car but with the battery taken out. They told him to get effed and called the cops. I believe they picked the guy up a few hours later. This just reminded me of my friend who pawned the DSLR camera I let him borrow for a school project. I asked for it back a good amount of times, and not once did he tell me what he did with it. I had to hear it from someone else, and then he claimed that I gave it to him. A man brought in a bag of white snow and asked if I would buy it, then resell it back to him in a couple of days. Bold plan on the part of the seller here. Unfortunately, there's no further detail as to whether they called the cops on them, but there is a pretty funny follow-up comment. "Hey boss, this guy just sold us like 10 kilos of white snow and wants to buy it back in a few days. Weird, what's the point in exchanging 5 kilos of substances back and forth? Is this some sort of scam? I don't know. When he comes back to pick up his 2.5 kilos, we'll have to ask about that." Not an owner, but I got a call from a pawn shop saying that one of my at-home employees tried to sell her work computer. It has my company's logo and contact info right on it, plain as day. How stupid can some people be? A school security guard pawned his service weapon and other equipment. He got caught by his supervisor carrying around a pellet shooter. I knew someone once who was into some bad stuff. He didn't have his school-provided laptop at class one day, and never again after that. As it turns out, it was his, for these laptops were indeed our own personal property, even though the school, quote, gave them to us. But the thing is, what they meant by giving each student a nice free laptop was overcharging the mother effers ×2 and building it into the price of tuition, and therefore the student loan. So I had that computer for a while, and he sold his to a pawn shop. How many college students do you know who would refuse a new MacBook Pro back in 2010 that they wouldn't have to pay for until they began paying back their student loans? A guy literally brought in a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. He was doing yard work for this old lady whose husband had passed. She gave it to him for doing some yard work, not realizing it was live and active. The guy was career military, and after the bomb squad came and disabled it, they went to her house and found a trove of similarly very illegal military-grade weapons. Just a worker at one of these stores, but we had a couple come in to pawn their backhoe over the weekends. Happens a lot, and brought their bill of sale. They wanted a simple $1,000 loan, which wasn't bad considering how much it was worth. No more than 30 minutes later, cops are there with the owner. Apparently they worked for him and went and pawned all of his industrial equipment. In a similar vein, my friend found some green herb in the oven he brought from a used appliance store. The shop called him to ask about the oven. Luckily, he didn't give out his address. I literally had a customer come in and say, "Hi, I've just stolen this phone off my sister. How much will you give me for it?" Also had a customer bring in 5 MacBooks at the same time with a certain logo on it which gave me the impression they were stolen. I told him to leave them with me for testing and called the police. Had another customer bring in a gun and a crossbow. That was weird. I'm in the UK and this is not a normal thing. Story from the 90s. My Fender Stratocaster was stolen and I reported it. Couple of years passed and an officer called me. "Your guitar serial number showed up at a pawn shop." Great, so you know who stole it. The guy who sold it at a pawn shop said it was a present from his girlfriend, but she died. Okay, so I get my guitar back? No, the pawn shop already sold it. Don't they have to check serial numbers? Yeah, but that can take 30 days and we can't expect them to hold on to this stuff forever. What? So what do I do now? Nothing really. So why are you calling me? I just thought you'd want to know. Bye. True story. Most stuff isn't even worth the time to report it stolen. You always got to look out for the people who bring in a crap ton of brand spanking new tools or electronics. Over time, you learn to read people based on their appearance, behavior, and personal information. An experienced broker can almost always immediately sleuth out whether they're stolen or not. In these cases, they mostly are. I've never had someone intentionally bring in illicit items, but it's important to check pockets and compartments on cases and similar things. It's not unheard of for some eclectic customer to forget about a little baggie of green herb that they'd stashed. One guy paid off his loan with cash, and there was a thin layer of white residue coating it. The first time I'd seen that one. And not illegal, but toward the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, some wisecrack nutcase did try to sell us disinfectant. Funny, but also annoying. I wonder if that last guy had acquired all of his before eBay and Amazon had stopped letting others price gorge off them. If so, double screw that guy. I had this guitar that had a little sliding door on the side, meant to hold picks. I put green herb in there as a joke. I completely forgot about it as I was selling it. They were pretty chill. Oh god, there was this one really weird guy who brought in a dead duck while hunting is illegal in my area, and also just why? Wouldn't call this illegal per se, but I feel like I have to share this. A friend of mine owns a pawn shop, and one day a guy walks in with a cardboard box filled to the top with his own number 2. He claims that it's magic, and my friend cuts him off right there and kicks him out. As he's walking out, he drops the box by accident and gets all of his crap on the floor. Sees the mess he's made, stares at the horrid pile of feces for a couple of seconds and runs out of the shop. My friend never got his name and never saw him again. The smell would proceed to linger in the shop for a good month after it was cleaned up. I was in the US Army from the early 1990s until 2014, and I knew a guy like this in about 1993 or 94. Our whole unit moved from Fort Lewis, Washington, down to Fort Polk, Louisiana. This genius goes into the little local town and gets a Radio Shack credit card because active duty military members were pretty much immediately approved because of our guaranteed monthly income. Smart guy comes up with a great plan to buy a bunch of stuff at Radio Shack when he needed a few bucks, then take it down the road and sell it at the local pawn shop. It was all new equipment in a sealed box, so the pawn shop gave him about 15% of the retail price for everything he brought in. He just figured that after a few years, he'd be making enough money to pay off the credit card bills, or that the credit card company would just drop the charges? He was such a screw-up. He was being processed for discharge and he didn't even realize it. The last I saw, he was getting kicked out with nowhere to go afterward. I felt bad for him, but at the same time, I liked seeing him get messed over for knowingly messing over the system for so long. I was in a pawn shop when this happened. Someone brought in a wheelchair with the tag for the local hospital on the back. Example, property of somewhere hospital. The pawn shop owner told him to leave it and get out. They did, and he called the non-emergency line. The police came and picked it up and took it back to the hospital, or that's what they said they were doing anyway. A friend of mine owns a shop. One day a woman walks in and asks if there's a female employee she could talk to. No problem, it's a family shop and his 18-year-old daughter comes out to help her. She asks to go out to her car where she opens the trunk. Whole thing is packed with bedroom toys, bondage stuff, outfits, and a big box of phallic items. The woman says her sister, who recently passed away, sold this stuff at parties, and she had no idea what to do with it. I used to work at a pawn store. A shady guy brought in a tiger skull. I don't remember if it was illegal or not, but the owner was yelling at him. He kept coming back and bringing animal skin and skulls. I think the police substance busted his house, from what the owner told me. A friend of mine owns a rather unique store with a lot of authentic medieval weaponry, armor, clothing, and similar. While I was there, a young couple decided his shop was the place to sell a few old SS daggers, belts, flags, and other Third Reich memorabilia. Solid logic, except for one thing. We're in Germany. Here, the state kind of frowns upon either owning or selling this stuff. They could have donated it to any museum and would have had no issue with the law whatsoever. I mean, it wasn't their fault they found it, right? But they figured that if Grandpa was from that particular organization, he could at least help with the funds for the renovations, and decided cash was better than being named in a museum leaflet. My friend was mostly insulted by the idea. That's just because he owns a medieval store and sells historic weapons. I mean, he must know a collector for this sort of stuff that would pay cash, but that was the end of it. He told them to get out and donate it. Or if they insist on selling it, ship it to the US. More money from history buffs, or at least not one happy little German extremist with a new happy stabby toy. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was on the receiving end of someone selling my stolen stuff at one of these stores. We had our house burgled in the UK. Me and my dad went to some pawn shops to give them a list of everything taken. While we were in there, someone came up to the counter and started unloading a bunch of stuff they want to sell, and it was our stuff. We got into a major incident inside the shop. The jerk manager of cash converters was saying it's nothing to do with him and to take it all outside. Sorry buddy, but when you're happy to buy a camera full of someone else's family photos, a laptop, and a bunch of other electronics from two junkies who look like they're homeless, no teeth, obvious signs of substance use, among other things, then it's absolutely 100% your problem to deal with. The police were called, junkies charged with handling stolen goods, and I got charged with attacking them. That was later dropped. Nobody charged with the actual burglary, so no real punishments for anyone involved. I don't know if it's necessarily illegal, but one time a guy brought me a handful of human teeth with bloody roots and gold fillings. He wanted me to extract the gold. I said, no thanks, bro. Even as a guy who works on a channel where we read objectively bat-crap crazy stuff all the time, I have to admit this one was a bit of a shock. So do people just think that all people who work at these shops are criminal fences or something? An MP40. Not actually me, but my significant other. He manages a store owned by a national chain. He brought it in on pawn, and as with all neat things, he was just waiting for the loan to drop after the 30 days of payment before the item went out on sale. At this point, he could purchase it. Now, I'm not a huge weapon historian, but I know the era and style and had to ask, that thing is super rare if it's not full auto. When a weapon is taken in on loan, the weapon is run, not the person, so our state's Bureau of Investigation was notified of its existence. Not only is a federal stamp for automatic weapons expensive as frick, it's also difficult to obtain, so he was no longer going to purchase it. And it's a good thing, because shortly after, the gun was seized by ATF, which is when we found out the actual worth, $10,000 to $20,000. Original owner brought it back as a war trophy, and the son is the one who got a loan, for like $200, but it was never registered, so it was contraband. I don't like pawn shops. My buddy had his surfboard stolen. A few weeks later, he found his board in a pawn shop. My buddy approached the staff and said it was his and that it was stolen. The staff then told him he had to buy the board back if he wanted it. The police were called because the board was reported stolen. Upon the arrival of the police, my buddy learned he still had to buy back the board if he wanted it back and then file a claim with the state to get his money back. Why does the state cover pawn shops selling stolen goods? Really nice old-looking farmer man walks in with a shotty with a barrel way too short. Long story short, boss brought it off him and immediately called the local police department to tell them. The cop asked if you could just remove the barrel and dispose of it as it was too much paperwork and hassle to come down and get it. The local police department are a fricking joke. A TV was stolen from my dad's office and sold to a pawn shop. This had been happening with yard decorations and our neighbors told us what pawn shop to look at. Sure enough, it showed up, and at first the manager wouldn't provide any info or even care that we thought it was stolen. My dad then offered to buy it and requested that the TV be plugged in to check for defects. It worked just fine, and my dad said he'll take it, and then pulled the remote out of his pocket that the thief didn't take and turned the TV off, proving it was his. The manager then had to call and report this. Turns out accepting a TV without a remote is a red flag that he missed in this case. The manager quit, but the general belief was that he knew most of the stuff he was selling was stolen, but he fudged paperwork to keep the thief's identity a secret. My dad put him in his place and humiliated him in the most simple way for being a lying prick. My friend's dad works at a pawn shop in a crappy area and has had some crazy stuff come in, mostly stolen weapons and tools, but the story he likes to tell is when a homeless guy tried to sell a sawn-off shotty covered in tape. They called the cops and the guy tells him he found it in the park. A block away from my high school was a pawn shop. It was announced that everyone in the entire school was going to get a Chromebook to do some schoolwork. On the first day that we got the Chromebooks, it was rumored that multiple people had brought them to the pawn shop to make a quick buck. I asked my teachers who was in charge of all the Chromebook repairs about this later, and he said that only one student had actually done it that he knew of, and he used the money to buy green herb. When my first fiancée and I parted ways, I went to go sell my ring. She'd given me her ring back, so I went to pawn them because I was broke and I got so many dirty looks for selling an engagement ring. I think they thought I stole it despite what I told them, but them's the breaks, I suppose. One of the guys who worked at the place told me that someone brought in an F-box, a decent-sized box that has a switch on it that turns on a motor inside that has a connection to a toy that thrusts in and out of a hole. I saw a guy in my local store bring in about 3 automatic weapons with the ammo and about 10 grenades, ready to use. Not sure if it was illegal or not, but it made my antique Hot Wheels collection look like crap. I work in a store. Not really illegal in itself, but probably the most contact with law enforcement that I've had. I live in the UK where we have to put the serial number of any technology through a police check before paying the customer. We put it in and it flagged as wanted by the police. Within 10 minutes, the police were there and asking us to hand the phone over and talk to the guy. We hadn't even gotten through to them yet on the phone. From what I understand, the guy brought it online a few months back. Unfortunately for him, the phone was wanted in connection with a murder. The look on that poor guy's face. That is a really unlucky eBay case that my dude there got himself. Don't you hate it when you try to be thrifty and end up being taken down to the station for an intense questioning and then they keep your damn phone? My house was broken into years back. They stole very particular items. My mum's laptop, which was hidden under the couch, our great-grandmother's jewelry and such. My laptop, Wacom pen tablet, and iPad were all sitting on the kitchen table, and the only thing they took was my iPad and the pen to my Wacom tablet. They left my laptop and the tablet itself. Remember these points for later. The cops couldn't find any good prints to run through the database, and no one was immediately found as a suspect. Fast forward a few months, my brother manages one of the biggest pawn shops in our city, and he called me to tell me that some guy just tried to pawn my iPad. The guy handed the iPad to my brother turned it on and the home screen is set to a picture of me and my nephew. Brother tells the guy that he has to take it to the back and check the serial numbers after getting the guy's driver's license. Brother calls the cops and then comes back out to tell the guy that he has to keep the iPad because it's stolen property. The guy books it out of there, but he wasn't very bright. My brother has all of his personal information. The cops did an investigation and come to find out this guy is the head of a large substance and theft ring. His cronies steal things and they have to give him the stolen goods, and then he gives them the substances. Well, a few more months go by and we found out that our mum's best friend's boyfriend was the guy who put the hit on our house. He had an oxy problem due to a bad back surgery and a substance-dealing doctor. When the doc cut the supply, he turned to other means. It wasn't him that broke in or stole our stuff, however. He just knew that I used my computer for my job and made sure they left my laptop and stole my mum's. He and his boss, along with multiple other addicts and career thieves, were brought down by my iPad. The cops said they'd broken into an estimated 300-plus homes and had stolen millions of dollars in property. I work in one, and honestly, you just never know what's going to come through that door. Former employee. The most illegal thing brought to my shop was an 8-ball of white snow. He wasn't selling it but wanted to buy a digital scale, and he brought the ball along just to test the scales we had. Aside from that, a chainsaw. Although not illegal in itself, they used it to threaten me, which was pretty illegal. Pawn shops in a big metro get pretty crazy. I had this street rat named Tintin bring in a purse with fresh bloodstains on it. I used to work in a pawn shop that was just for tools. This guy brought in these really nice top-of-the-line wrenches to sell. He said business was booming, and I asked what he did, and he said, "You really want to know?" In a scared kind of way. I was like, "Yeah, I'm just making small talk," and he said he was a substance dealer. So I said I don't want the wrenches, they were probably stolen. I used to work in an electronics or DVDs games secondhand store, and we used to get people in all the time selling what were blatantly mass-run bootlegs. Hundreds of copies of the same DVD, which under even rudimentary inspection didn't come off a proper print run. Heck, if you popped one in a player, it usually just cut right into the movie a few seconds in or something like that. That and people who had just stolen crap from a first-hand retailer nearby and were busy tearing the packaging off in the damn queue for the registers. One of my friends in high school somehow managed to steal several laptops from cash converters. Got away with it too. That was until they tried to sell one of the laptops they stole back to cash converters the very next week, with the CC sticker and barcode still on the bottom. He was quickly caught and they found his whole stash and he did 100 hours of community service. What is the funniest answer to a test when the student clearly didn't know the answer? I graded AP exams this summer. For one essay question, I got an awesome barbecue sauce recipe from a kid in Tennessee. I've made that a couple of times, and it's excellent. I was marking a final year engineering test. I'm a teacher's assistant, not a lecturer. And instead of answering the last question, some guy drew an incredibly detailed portrait of himself serving fries at McDonald's with the caption, "Me if I fail this test." I still had to fail him, but I did feel bad about it. Some say he's serving fries to this day. It wasn't for a test, but a large portion of the class didn't do an assignment, so the teacher decided to assign a makeup assignment. He wasn't planning on assigning anything, so he asked the class for ideas. Someone said, "An essay about procrastination," and he said, I like that idea, and the conversation ended with that. Next class rolls around and someone turns in an essay titled The Importance of Effective Communication, because he never actually assigned the essay. It was a pass or fail class, so the essay was pretty much a completion grade. The teacher accepted it and gave him a warning that if he tried that in any other class, he might have gotten a 0. I was helping a teacher grade back in high school, and I was grading a kid's geometry quiz. The question was a 2-column proof, and it asked to prove that one side was congruent to another based off 2 triangles being congruent. Had to prove that the 2 triangles were congruent first. This was his whole answer. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle BCD because they kinda look the same. Side AB equals side DB because they're both 3 eraser lengths long. College-level physics exam asked for a brief description of Maxwell's theory. The instructor shamed a student by reading aloud his answer. Good to the last drop. Just another student. We had a test which involved life skills. The question was, what are 2 causes of infertility in males? His response was lack of a wang. He tried to argue that he wasn't wrong and somehow got a mark. I don't know if the teacher survived that debate with a straight face, but I know for a fact that I wouldn't have been able to. Sorry students, this is what happens when you go for the low-hanging fruit. No pun intended. My friend needed to name Alga Hiss on his government exam. He forgot the dude's name, so he put I am not a spy. Back in college, if I vaguely knew the word I needed to answer, like Alga Hiss, I'd write out the A very clearly and then scribble next to it so it looked like I knew the answer and just had crappy handwriting. It worked extremely well. As a teacher's assistant in my high school grading chemistry tests, for one question, which read, convert 1 meter into millimeters, one student had converted meters to yards to feet to inches to centimeters to millimeters, rather than just multiply by 1,000. My high school teacher would always encourage us to write funny answers down if we didn't know anything. She found marking tests extremely boring, so if we could make her laugh, we'd at least get 0.5 of a mark on it. The student actually knew the answer, he just didn't know how to spell it. I taught history and showed a video clip of Ronald Reagan's famous, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." In a later quiz, I asked students to write down this quote, with my favorite response starting, "Mr. Gooberchuck." I had one ESL student who couldn't quite get the hang of changing singular nouns into plurals. I have a pen got him full marks on the unit test. I have 2 pen and added an IS at the end of the word pen didn't get him full marks. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Double Sausage Dude just has really crappy grammar. It wasn't an answer, it was a proposition. Saw a post on Reddit where someone drew a picture and got credit for it for a test answer. So I did the same thing on my next science test. Teach told me that my drawing of a giraffe was garbage and gave me nothing. I was a student teaching first grade and was quizzing a student on sight words. The word was horse, and he said, "Whores, whores, whores!" I'm a teacher that hasn't got any super funny answers yet, but when I was a student, my philosophy class did a group thing about a test. Our professor had told us that at the start of the quarter, that when we did the final, if every single person turned in the test that's blank except for a name, we'd all get an A. Apparently, he made this offer to every class for years. Well, of the 20 or so of us in the class, only one person was going to pass. We all thought the teacher was a jerk. So when it came time for the final, he passed out the test and left to go to his office. After he was gone, we all talked about it, and those of us who had bad grades said, "We have nothing to lose by turning in a blank paper. We're failing anyway." And then we looked at the one guy who was passing. He said, "I'm a philosophy major, so I just want to find out if he means it or not. Let's do it." So we all wrote down our names on our individual tests. Then we lined up and went to his office and one by one handed him our blank tests. He was shocked. We were the first class to pull it off. He made us promise not to tell anyone, and he did give us all 100% on the final. I clearly didn't keep my promise about not talking about it. One time, a kid in my Latin class started sneezing out various denominations of bills when turning in his test. The total added up to $75. I think he dropped the class. When my wife and I were TAs in grad school, We proctored and then graded an essay exam. We had a student write, "I don't know, so here's a picture of a puppy," and he then drew a beautiful picture of a puppy. It took him nearly an hour to complete it. To this day, when I ask my wife a question and she doesn't know the answer, she just says, "puppy." Well, I'm not a grader, but I've got one. An old teacher of mine used to grade AP stats tests, and he said a student once drew an elaborate Rube Goldberg chain reaction kind of thing across 2 pages for a short answer. Not me, but a classmate of mine. In my 8th grade social studies class, the teacher offhandedly mentioned, "Necessity is the mother of invention." On the test, one question was, "Blank is the mother of blank." My classmate wrote, "Mary is the mother of Jesus," and we were all really upset that he didn't get the credit. 8th grade free response question, explain how the United States acquired the Louisiana Purchase. My answer? The United States purchased Louisiana. I received full credit. Well, to be fair to you, it was a stupidly worded question. What else were you going to say? Napoleon was like, "Oh my god, we need those dollar bills." And then Jefferson was like, "But seriously, it's not in the Constitution that I can buy stuff like that." And then Jefferson's cabinet was like, "Stop being a jerk and buy it." And then Jefferson was like, "K." I mean, your teacher just wrote the worst question ever. I had a friend who put "Obama is a lizard" as an answer to all of the AP Gov-free response questions. The narrator feels like, given what he's learned about certain parts of the US, you might be able to get a partial credit on that answer depending on which deep red state you did that in. Got to teach a technical theatre class and gave a quiz at the beginning to see what the kids knew. One of the questions was, "Name a good conductor." I was looking for metal conductor like copper or brass, ended up with several answers like Leopold Stokowski, Leonard Bernstein, and several famous composers. We all had a good laugh when we went over the answers. A bit different, not quite a test. Class was reading a play in English literature during junior year. We were rotating parts between students through the various acts, point being that we did actually have parts, so people weren't necessarily focusing on the story as much as they were on when it was going to be their turn to speak. Some girl's line comes up and her character is mentally handicapped. The line read, "Make horse sounds," with horse being spelt HOARSE, as in raspy throat. The student started to neigh. I don't know about credit, but we all had a good laugh. On a sample essay I read for AP World History, they were listing evidence for a question related to American Indians. One kid wiped his blood on the exam sheet and wrote, "This is a blood sacrifice to the sun god of the Incas." Sadly, he didn't get the credit. I took a philosophy class in high school. For the final paper, we had the option to write an essay arguing to the teacher that we were not a figment of his imagination. I decided to do the opposite. I wrote a whole essay about how I was a figment of my teacher's imagination, and I ended up with a B in the course. That was the only assignment I handed in for the entire course. When I was a sophomore in high school, I was in a biology class, and the very first test I was clueless. At this point in time, I didn't quite know the teacher or his style or anything about him, really. So naturally, clueless on the essay question, I decided to go meta and write a speech about how I was bombing the test. I compared it to Harry Truman deciding to nuke Japan, and how that was thought to have saved lives. By my own nuking of the test, who knows, maybe I could do the same. I got a call from my mum later on. He didn't like it. In fact, he decided to interpret it as a bomb threat. Needless to say, that was a rough semester afterwards. I was one of the last classes to take a hotly contested, statewide standardized exam. In its dying days, some big muckety-muck decided it would be a great idea to add a science portion to the exam. Their mistake was telling my class that we were the first class to take it, and therefore were simply testing if it was useful for the school board, and our results on that section would have no bearing on our final test results. The question was something like, Susie and John have a heavy box. They need to put the heavy box on a shelf, but it's too heavy. They have several pieces of wood, a saw, a pulley, etc., etc. Design a system for moving a box to the shelf and explain why this works in scientific terms. My response? Susie and John could do many things. They could build a lever, as you're obviously suggesting they do with the boards, but the box would likely slide back down the lever and kill Susie and John. Here is a drawing of Susie and John dead under a box. They could build a pulley, But I don't want to explain how that works, and also, if they're too small to reach the shelf with the box, how the frick are they going to attach a pulley to the roof? Drawing of Susie and John looking sad as their parents yell at them for screwing around with the garage ceiling. My recommendation is that Susie and John open the fricking box and move everything individually like normal human beings. Picture of Susie and John high-fiving and saying, "Gee, Willy Walkers, we did it!" Since the test was unscored, I never found out how they liked my solution, but I do hope I gave some old ladies a few conniption fits. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not exactly an answer to the prompt, but at my high school, thanks to a friend, we now have the AP Stats Challenge. Get 5 on the test while writing the entire free response portion in haikus, and only haikus. So I think 5 to 10 people have pulled it off, and it definitely made the test a lot more entertaining for me. Not a teacher, but in AP Physics 2 on a practice test, so naturally I didn't care as much. When asked to solve for the mass defect, I explained how mass effect drives work in great detail, as well as different uses. I think my teacher liked it because he wrote, "This is my favorite store on the Citadel," instead of marking it wrong. Not a grader, but on the AP exam for world history, a friend of mine, rather than actually write an essay on one of the assigned topics, described the plot of Mulan. That's my second favorite story involving her. Purposefully easy extra credit question asked, "Who's your favorite founding father and why is it Alexander Hamilton?" I responded with Aaron Burr and drew a short stick figure montage of their famous duel. I knew the answer but decided to be flippant regardless. I still got full points. Once on an endocrinology exam I was sitting, the last question required everyone to reference 5 RCTs published in a journal in APA format. No one had been told that anything like this would be on their exam, and obviously no one was going to remember all the authors of a study off the top of their heads. So being my frustrated self, I referenced How to Be an Absolute B-Word by lecturer's name. 2 weeks later, I got called into her office and was made to apologize and told to not do this again. I love the sass on display here. Also, is the teacher's ego so fragile that they wanted to officially reprimand a student for writing an answer in a private setting that only the grader would see? I get that it's disrespectful, but honestly, who is so butthurt by that they go to the hassle of arranging a formal disciplining session? I am the student in this case. I'm taking AP Calculus and it's absolutely kicking my butt. When I didn't know an answer, I wrote a prayer to the God of Math. O Lord of Math, grant me thy favor, that I may understand this thy holy work, for I am yet powerless before your tests, and weak in my calculations. Amen. I got a half credit. On my AP Calc test last year, there was one question that I had no idea what the frick they were even asking. After staring at it for about 10 minutes, I gave up and drew a portrait of the proctor surrounded by velociraptors and climbing up a rope from a helicopter. I like to think I got at least partial credit for that. I was taking a film history and appreciation class at college and came across this question. What is camera obscura? My answer was, the type of camera a hipster uses. I got no points, but my professor said he got a good laugh out of it. Biochemistry exam. There was a complicated synthesis question. How would you produce X? And the student answered, with blood magic. The answer was written in his blood. I asked about it later. The student had gotten a paper cut when taking the test, apparently. Test included reading a map of Rome and finding your way around using coordinates. Question: how can you get to the Colosseum from the starting point? Plot out a route on the grid provided. My answer: I don't need the grid because I've played Assassin's Creed Brotherhood enough to know where I'm going. Question: who was Genghis Khan? Answer: the host of The Price is Right from about 300 AD to 350 AD. Back in the 3rd grade, I had a 2-part written question on a science test. Part 1. If you had to change the gas nitrogen to a liquid, how would you do it? My answer: I would change it to a liquid. Part 2. Explain what would happen. My answer: it would change to a liquid. Funny thing is, I actually got full credit. My teacher wrote something like, I can't say that this is what I was looking for, but I can't say that it's wrong either. Not a teacher, but when I was in high school, I had an essay exam about a book I hadn't read. Instead of answering the question, I wrote an essay about why I didn't read the book and talked about another book I'd read instead. My teacher ended up liking it and gave me a good grade, even though I hadn't read the book he assigned. I guess he liked that I put effort into writing an essay about a book I'd actually read instead of trying to bullcrap him. Question: what is X? Answer: it's certainly not Y. Question: state the differential and integral form of Hooke's law. Answer: the differential and integral form of Hooke's law. I got a full credit on each of these masterpieces. I had to read Heart of Darkness in high school. I literally couldn't get more than 3 pages into it. We had to write an essay in class about it, so I pretty much wrote, "There's a man on a boat, and he's recounting a tale that took place in Africa." I make it 3 pages in and realize that I haven't actually comprehended more than the first paragraph, so I start over, "There's a man on a boat," and just repeated that for a page. Then we had to read our essays aloud, and luckily we were in the AP class, so the teacher let us get away with crap. Also, had to do the same thing with All the King's Men, and I wrote about the repulsive writing style. There's a car on a road, and it's driving down the road, and it's about to go off the road, and there's an N-word in the field by the road. But the N-word doesn't see the car, and the car doesn't see him, and it's about to go off the road. But they don't see each other. This is a terrible book. The narrator hasn't read All the King's Men and is not sure that this succinct summary will be enough to sway them over to doing so. Let him know in the comments if it's worth picking up. On a quiz in Bio 2, it asked what group a certain organism was in. I didn't know, so I put Blue Man Group. My TA apparently liked it because I got the point anyway. When I was in American history in high school, I had a test where one of the questions was asking what the 19th Amendment was. It was the women's right to vote, by the way. My teacher was male, and I was just screwing around and thought I'd try to make him laugh. So for the answer, I put a mistake. Ended up getting 100% on that test. I got one from both sides of the spectrum. Once in advanced calculus, the final question was something which I had no clue how to answer. So I just wrote in the entire space, 7. It turned out 7 was the correct answer. However, I got no credit for it for not showing any working. And when I was a marker at university, I was going through the tests and a question was accounting. Describe a transaction which causes a decrease in an asset and also equity. A student's answer was, a building caught on fire and got destroyed. Technically, he was correct, although it wasn't really a transaction, more of an event. Question: what are your opinions on doing the deed before marriage? 16 marks. Answer: I wouldn't buy a car before test driving it. How are you even graded on this? It's asking your opinion. Even not answering could be taken as meaning you're indifferent. In 12th grade, me and a buddy of mine, let's call him Tom, were both in the same calculus and vectors class. I already decided to major in history at a university, so my mark in this class didn't mean too much to me. Anyways, during the exam, I got to a question which asked me to graph the derivative of a given function. Not knowing what it was, I simply drew a kitty face on the graph, cause screw it, and moved on. About 10 minutes later, Tom, who was sitting beside me, discreetly got my attention, and I see he's stuck on that same problem, and hoping I'll help him out. Chuckling to myself, I turned to the question on my exam and moved it over slightly. Seeing what I'd done, Tom shook his head, quietly whispered, "Screw it," and did the same thing. Suffice to say, our teacher was less than happy with us after the exam. In high school, I was in biology class with a buddy of mine. The class and the teacher were a complete joke and no one took it seriously. On an exam, the teacher wanted an essay on something, and my buddy didn't feel like writing it. Instead, he drew a picture of Jesus and wrote, "Jesus is always the answer," above it. He received full credit. If my English teacher is on Reddit and sees this, she'll probably use my answer. We had a scarlet letter quiz and had to connect the term antimonian to the novel. I got it in my head that antimony was a woman in a Greek myth who was punished for adultery like Hester. I was the student. Spelling test. Asked to spell euthanasia. My answer was youth in Asia, the 3 words jammed together. On my English 1 last year, on one essay I wrote the names of 150 NFL football players. I got a 4. University. I dropped Chem 2 lecture, but still had to take the corresponding lab because of drop limits. Didn't get most of the material, but didn't particularly care if I failed because it was only 1 credit anyway. I drew Pokemon for all the answers on the final. I got an A. The professor was a cool guy. On the last day of class, someone brought in a big flan, another girl brought a guitar, we had a mini party, and the professor played the guitar for us. What is the most unethical thing you've been asked to do at work? I worked at a well-known automotive garage chain. I quit on my second day on the job because while I was doing an oil change, my manager told me to take out the customer's air filter, rub it on the ground outside and show it to the customer so they believe it needs to be changed. As a customer, I changed an air filter myself an hour before I took it in for an oil change, and I was suggested to replace it because it was dirty. I showed them the receipt, and they said, "Well, the entire system makes it dirty, you see." I was asked to ignore 15 open 50-gallon drums that were filled with used phosphoric acid sitting out back of a workshop next to a stream. In the middle of a city, heavy rains and hurricane winds tipped a few over one night. The boss dumped one out on the ground because he needed the drum. When I quit, I called the city on their butts. I used to work in event management and was asked to ignore fire safety violations on a regular basis. One time we hosted a funeral for a sort of local celebrity with about 3,500 people in attendance, at a venue that was licensed for 300. It was frighteningly obvious that any sort of mass panic would be absolutely disastrous, so the 2 staff members decided to go behind management's back and call the police. Another time, the boss at a venue refused to repair a broken heater in the middle of winter, with outside temperatures being well below freezing. He told the staff to simply use the gas oven to heat. CO poisoning is a big risk, especially since this is an industrial-strength oven meant for professional catering we're talking about. Where I am, it's illegal to operate an oven like that without a suitable ventilation system in place, which would have needed to be turned off in order to heat the place up. I'm in IT. I was asked by an executive to delete very incriminating emails he had sent to an innocent receptionist from our Exchange server. He thought they were private and she was talking about suing. He sent this request over email. I sent it to our HR and investigative units. Anytime there's a firefight or shooting incident in a war zone, afterwards you routinely have to fill out sworn statements as to how the events went down, who shot whom, etc. Let's just say there's a lot of top-down pressure and coaching beforehand, and nobody fills those out truthfully. That's simultaneously shocking and not surprising at all. That's how armies maintain the appearance that they're the good guys in any given engagement, maintain the appearance of competence to their superiors, and try to sweep friendly fire cases like Pat Tillman under the rug. Pretty shifty. I worked graveyard shift at a gas station. The owner came in under the influence one night and we were chatting. We talked about benign things and I mentioned that I just found out I was pregnant. The first thing he said was, "Good, then I wouldn't have to use protection." I was so taken back that I didn't say anything. He went on to ask me if I had tattoos in any place that he couldn't see. Then he commented on my necklace. It had tiny handcuffs on it. He asked if that's how I liked it, handcuffed. After all that and me refusing his requests politely, he said, "How much money do I have to get out of the ATM to have you tonight?" My response was he'd better go home to his wife and kids before I called them to let them know where he was. He threatened to fire me. The next day, my manager pulls me aside and asks what happened. Then he asked if I would just keep it to myself. I told him he would if he'd take me off graveyard shifts. That's how I got to keep my job and work better hours. I could make a list, but we'd be here a while. I used to work in a senior home which claimed to be independent living for the extraordinarily wealthy kind of old people. And let me tell you, that place was a prison. Kitchen was regularly below health standards and the place was a gosh darn rip-off for our residents. Our boss's stepmom moved in and was unable to move, and liability-wise we weren't able to help her with anything. However, boss would make an exception calling it above and beyond care. Screw that, if she fell we all knew our butts were on the line. Also, illegal petty cash boxes and hundreds of off-the-book expenses for the boss. My buddy used to keep the books there and he actually gave up on asking how much he was doing that was illegal. Be very careful about what senior homes you send your loved ones to, people. Not me personally, however, I was an assistant manager of a sports bar a few months ago. The owner's son and general manager of my store allowed an 18-year-old to serve booze. 19 is the minimum in my state, and she failed to card and served an underage person who got in a wreck. That person's car was totaled and she sustained severe injuries but lived. The owner's son called the other girl who was working on that shift, who was of legal age, and told her verbatim, "I want you to go home and practice saying in the mirror, 'I was your server and I carded you.'" She thought she had no option but to go along with it, and I had to be the one to tell the server what her boss was asking to do was commit perjury, and that if she did it, she'd go to jail, have a record, and wouldn't be able to so much as get a job at Walmart when she got out. Screw that guy for trying to ruin another person's life because he made a horrible mistake. The manager wanted me to clean the bathrooms, but he was being kinda weird, so I said no. Turns out a homeless person had smeared crap and blood all over the walls. I told him later he was required to get a hazmat team to take care of that. I'm not risking getting any number of diseases. He just got some other rube to do it. Similar thing happened to my friend at Macca's, except I'm pretty sure it wasn't a homeless person. She was only 14 and the manager refused to even give her gloves. Another older employee threatened to get him fired if he tried to make anyone else clean the bathroom without following procedure. He backed down, but the woman got him fired anyway because he was a power-hungry craphead who liked to use his position to get the younger employees to do questionable stuff. The amount of factory managers that want the light curtains, area scanners, and other safety features disabled on their machines in the name of speeding up production is pretty appalling. That crap's there for a reason, and if I disable it, my butt is on the line if or when your employee gets killed. I work in documentary production, and part of my job is to do annotated scripts for big international networks. I'm sure a lot of people here watch them. This is where you'll have to give references for every single line in your script to prove to the network that what you've written is 100% factual. There was a line written by the scriptwriter and director that was not quite factual due to the way it was worded. I suggested the line be reworded, but he was adamant to have it that way. So of course the network came back to us and said either change the line or find a more concrete source. I searched and couldn't find a source backing it up because of course the line wasn't factual. The director asked me to make nice with one of the experts in the topic and have him sign off on the line as a fact. I refused to do it, but the director went ahead and did it himself, and the line made it into the final film. I get very frustrated every time I see the film on TV and hear the line. When I worked in manufacturing, I would get sent into places inside running machinery because I was small and had small hands. Many of those spots were also for confined space trained people, which I was not. If you hesitated, they would scream at you from behind, which is super helpful in a confined space when you're trying not to lose your fingers in a belt. Oh, and I made $8 an hour with no benefits. No wonder they sent all those jobs to China. This was early 2000s in Wisconsin. I was a temp making pots and pans on the third shift. My boss was useless and a butthole. He ended up getting demoted to a regular worker, but was too lazy to keep up, so he was fired eventually. I did keep all my fingers, but I almost lost my scalp once. My hair got caught under a running belt. Luckily, I thought fast and grabbed my ponytail and let it take a chunk of hair instead of the whole thing. It was crappy, but I've since learned that you shouldn't do something just because someone in authority tells you to. Thank goodness that the author specified they worked in the 2000s in Wisconsin, because otherwise the narrator would have assumed from this story that they were working in a Victorian mill in old London, back when sending people into moving machinery blades was the norm. I got told to cut an employee's hours, so he dropped to part-time status. That way, the company, more accurately that store in particular, wouldn't have to pay the cost of his insurance. He had recently just got back from having major colon surgery and was deemed a risk. The worst part was I needed this guy to work full-time in department, and I had a whole team of people itching to take vacation since we worked the holidays short-handed. Anyways, joke was on the company. Immediately after I was told to do this, I reached out to a rival company and jumped ship within 2 to 3 weeks. They ended up having to give surgery guy hours once I left. I haven't personally been asked to do anything illegal, but I work at a workers' comp insurance company. The amount of employers who won't report employee injuries is staggering. I've had family members call, sobbing and begging for us to pay medical bills for injuries that occurred at work, but they can't report the claim, so there's nothing we can do. We have employers who tell their employees that it's too late to report, and they think they're just crap out of luck. Guys, if you ever get injured at work, it has to be reported. There's no such thing as too late. Your claim needs to be reported. I used to work in construction as a fire protection services inspector. I'd say I was asked to ignore something dangerous about 1 out of every 3 sites. They also thought nothing of asking me to ignore it like someone else has before. I'm talking about things like an entire sprinkler system not actually being connected in a brand new building, or fire exits that don't exist. How about alarm systems that evacuate the wrong floor when smoke is detected? Apparently, I was a B-word for refusing to issue a fire safety certificate until errors like this were fixed, things that usually take about an hour to fix, which I was happy to wait and watch them do. I was asked to sleep with the health inspector to get us a pass. Cheap motel. A lot of sketchy things, including but not limited to working girls, gambling, bending of the liquor license. All these went on there, but I worked the front desk and was told, "If any ethnic people want a room, tell them we're full." I did not comply, and 1 or 2 times I was confronted and I just said, I didn't notice they were ethnic. I lasted 6 months there. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Years ago, I was working at a local pharmacy. The owner had always seemed like a revenue above all else kind of guy, often ranting at us pharmacy technicians about not making enough money. One day we had a patient come in with a prescription for an expensive medicine. So I tried to fill the prescription, but I noticed that our inventory for this rarely filled medicine was expired. I was filling out forms for new inventory when the owner saw what I was doing and told me to fill the prescription with the expired stuff. I tried to explain, but he silenced me with a glare. I looked to my co-workers for support, but they averted their glances. I ended up filling the prescription, but to this day I feel ashamed for not taking a stand against it. I quit the job a week later. I got asked to lie to customers, repeatedly, although this was a sales role, so it was more or less par for the course. If we worked over 40 hours, we wouldn't get time and a half, but we would get that money in an envelope in cash with no taxes taken out. So it sort of worked out. That's not legal. We would get a lot of stray cat dumps, and as you can imagine, it's very costly, but we did it anyway because you can't run an animal hospital and not love animals. Cats don't have Amex cards. Some strays were not very adoptable. We had a senior cat on a lot of meds that suffered seizures, and a weirdo wire-haired chihuahua that took a very long time to warm up to people. She bit, but had no teeth. And a house cat that had feline transmissible diseases. We had them for years. The pets, not the disease. The owner was bought out by a corporation. The first thing the corp wanted to do was bring all of the strays, even the residents, to the Humane Society. We fricking rioted. It took them a year to get them out one by one without causing too much upset, but I tell you this, none of them went to a shelter. I worked at a medical practice and the doctor would just throw medical waste and bags of used needles in the dumpster out back, instead of properly disposing of it. I still don't understand why. He could have lost his license and got slapped with thousands of dollars in fines. Just goes to show, even if you graduated from Columbia Medical School, you can still be a total fricking idiot. Not me, but my dad was asked to commit fraud in order to keep the company he was working for afloat. Ended up doing it and accumulating $16 million in fraud over the course of more than 10 years. And yes, he was jailed. He cooperated with the feds though, so he got less time. It would suck if I blew that secret on the internet. Folks, if a high-ranking boss ever asks you to do this, get them to sign an order or send an email detailing what they'd like you to do, and then immediately take it into the IRS or the equivalent. They're willing to get you sent to jail to keep their business afloat, so return the favor. I worked for a packaging company that made the pop-top caps for bottled water. They asked me to investigate altering the design of their caps so that it couldn't be reused. The idea or scheme was that if they invented a pop cap that would pop up but not back down again, they could market it to the bottled water companies as something that would force people to drink their product in a single sitting, and therefore be more likely to purchase another one later in the day, and prevent people from refilling the bottle from the tap because the lid would never close again. It was only half-heartedly thrown out there at a meeting, but everyone looked a bit uncomfortable about it and luckily it wasn't pursued. Which is just as well because as someone who thinks that bottled water is a rip-off and bottled water companies are wasting crap loads of plastic, I would not have been happy about working on that project. Working at a bar and restaurant, yeah, just cut the mold off those strawberries. Do it quick, we need them for the daiquiris. Followed sometime later by, you're cutting too much off. I was asked not to hire black people or out-of-shape people. Safe to say, I quit not long after that. Perform tasks I wasn't authorized for at all. I'm CNA and I can't tell you how many times a family member of a patient has demanded that we do the nurse's work or the physical therapist's work. Some of it I knew how to do in basic, but if I would have gotten it wrong and hurt my patient, it would have been on me. I was asked to blame a client team member for a mistake I made as there was a financial implication to my company if it was one of our team members who was at fault. I didn't consider doing that once though. I went above the person who asked me and told him it was my fault, and I think it actually worked out to my benefit long term. As a manager, I was asked to tell my 16-year-old coworker that he wasn't allowed to drink water while he was working the fryer in the summer because a customer saw him taking a sip and said it, quote, upset her. Yeah, safe to say I didn't repeat that order. Someone asked me to remove the password from their deceased daughter's laptop so they could see if there were any pictures on it. Apparently the daughter had tried to rescue her boyfriend who'd been dragged out to sea. Neither could swim and both drowned. I'm my own boss, so nobody made me, but boy was it an ethical conundrum. I've been in similar situations. What I do is unlock it privately, make sure there's nothing overtly damaging to their memory, like racy pictures or documents on how to kill people, and then give it back to them. It means so much to someone who lost someone they love to get pictures back. Plus, you can do someone who's gone a solid and protect their memory. That's really awesome of you. My best friend, who often watches these videos, hi Jay, has been instructed to completely destroy my phone and delete a specific folder on my computer. I'm not a bad person, but there's a lot of old conversations or journal writings or photos that I like to have for myself, but I would never want my daughter to find them. Huh. I was asked to schedule my bathroom breaks as I was going to the bathroom too many times during the day. When I was asked to write advertising copy for homeopathic children's medicines. Oh, and fluoride-free toothpaste, which does jack all to protect teeth. Background: busy fast food restaurant right at the end of the lunch rush. There was some bread sitting on the counter and my manager asked me to put it in the cabinet where it went. As I was putting it away, a customer came up to me and said, "Excuse me, but that bread was on the floor and someone picked it up and set it on the counter." I apologized and moved it back out of the cabinet and asked my manager about it just in case the customer was confused or something else. Her response? "Oh, just wait for the customer to leave and put it away once they're gone." Nope. I'm sure there have been worse things, but I recently left my job as a barista. There were a handful of times when we dealt with an offensive customer and I was asked by another barista to decaf their drink. I never did. The thought offended me even more because I take a lot of pride from my work ethic. Besides, I didn't want to lower myself to how a customer treats us, and it's not like I knew what they'd been going through either. Well done to you, you're a much more considerate and honorable person than the narrator. Personally, whenever I had customers like this, the only thing stopping me from pulling crap like decaffing their coffee was the fact that everyone could see what I was doing, and I'm too much of a coward to risk getting caught. The malice to screw with someone's orders I totally possess. In short, I had to sell booze to a drunk man with a bad ID, and I quit. I was working at a part-time job at a local gas station chain a few months back to make some extra cash. Near the end of my shift on my third day, I had a very drunk man come up to the counter to buy 2 large cases of beer. I asked him for his ID and it was shredded, taped back together and outdated. He kept insisting he was a regular and it would be fine. I asked my trainee manager for help and she actually made me sell booze to this guy. I tried to protest, but she told me it would cost me my job if I didn't. I admit I made the sale, but I immediately went on break and called the GM and the person above them, and they refused to do anything. So I finished the remaining hour and quit. I've been asked to cook chickens that didn't smell too good. You know those recycle bins at supermarkets? The glass ones get rather dangerous when you're transporting usually 20 to 30 pounds of sharp, broken glass to the back of the truck to go to a plant. My former bosses expected me to do that myself in pouring rain or snow, where I had to lift the container practically over my head to dump in this bigger container. All for minimum wage. Screw that. As a doctor in the ICU, I have to continue treating a patient who is clearly dying and has no chance of survival because family members who know nothing about medicine get to make the decision and they don't want the person to die. So a person with no chance of survival is subjected to all sorts of invasive procedures, medications that will end up having no effect, in addition to the CPR, which is quite a violent procedure and will not save them, but it will break their ribs, among other things. I view this futile medical treatment as unethical. If someone can't survive, why am I pretending to save them by going through these motions, which is doing nothing to help? We were loading a truck late one night when one of us noticed a girl lying in a nearby parking lot, having some kind of seizure. It was already late, the parking lot was empty, and there was nobody else around other than us to go render some assistance. She might have laid there for hours if none of us had offered to help. Nevertheless, our boss told us to mind our own business and finish loading the truck. I said to myself, I'm not going to just ignore someone who could be dying, so I started towards the parking lot. But my boss began insisting that I was on his time and that I would do what he told me to do. I told him to take me off his time and continued over to the girl in the parking lot. It was a long time ago, and now that I remember, my boss did call 911 when we saw her lying there, so he wasn't exactly just going to leave her there, he just didn't want any of us going over and getting involved. We had a flood at a Ford dealership I worked at. The parts department was below ground and under about a foot of water. My boss asked me to gather older inventory that he couldn't send back and soak it down with a hose. His plan was to add it to the insurance claim. It was about $15,000. I refused as it was blatant insurance fraud. He didn't push it. What obvious signals did you have to give to your crush that flew right over their head? I was pursuing him hard. He was making me dinner at his house and we were chatting. He makes a joke about the hoops he'd have to jump through to get a classy woman like me to sleep with him. I respond with, "It wouldn't take all that for you to get me in your bed," as I flirtatiously grin at him and roll my eyes towards his bedroom. He laughs and responds with, "So, what do you like on your salad?" Thankfully, I didn't give up on that dork and now we're happily living together in the mountains. Hey, computer store guy. The best response to, "Hey, let me have your number so we can study at my place sometime," is not to roll your eyes and say, "Oh yeah, because you're so much smarter than me. I don't need help. I'm fine." Though watching your coworker silently lose his crap in the background was reward enough for that interaction. Look, I knew he liked me. I got in prime kissing position, as in my lips way too close to his to be mistaken for anything else, and he still did nothing. So I kissed him, he barely kissed me back, and when I pulled away and smiled at him, he said, "I'm confused," and genuinely looked like he didn't believe that what had just happened was real. We've been together 7 years now, 3 of which we've been married. He still has moments weekly where I see that same cute, disbelieving expression on his face, and he'll hug me and say, "Are you sure this is real? It's too good to be true." Many girls gave me attention in high school, so I figured that meant we were all good friends, and I never tried anything. Years later, I find out that I was basically on The Bachelor but held off on dating my friends for so long that they all figured I was gay or uninterested, so they moved on. But actually, I'm just dumb. Life sucks sometimes. Every time I read a girl's signals as being glaringly obvious, I always just end up having been led on by an overly flirtatious friend. It blows, so I don't blame you. I outright told him I liked him. He laughed and went, "Okay, where are the cameras?" I'm female, had a guy tell me straight out he liked me in high school. My response? You shouldn't joke about stuff like that, you could hurt someone's feelings. Had a girl in high school tell me she liked me. I thought it was a joke for about 3 weeks. Then I finally said okay and agreed to a date. Turns out, my instincts were right and it was just a joke that 6 or 7 girls got in on. Same thing happened to me, only except it was a prom date. Needless to say, it took a long time to figure out my current fiancé liked me. So we have some contention about whether outright telling someone that you're romantically interested in them is an actual signal. That's how crappy the playing field is out there for some people, I guess. At least I would assume that most of these seem to be younger people, so us crusty older people likely have it easier on that front. This was one that happened to me. I'm a girl, but I might as well share it anyway. There was this guy in my class in elementary school, and he told me he had a crush on a girl in our class, and if I could guess who, he'd tell me. I guessed every girl in my class, and he said no to them all, so I eventually just assumed he was messing with me and gave up. It took me 10 years to realize that I'd forgotten to guess myself. I sat on his lap, I put his arms around my waist, rested my head on his shoulder, and held onto his hands. He still had no idea that I liked him. Hold on a second. Holding hands and resting your head on his shoulders was a sign of interest? Frick! My high school crush did that to me whenever she had the opportunity to do so. She'd even rest her head on my lap a few times when we were alone. God damn it. I guess it was a little past crush at this point, but we were on a date and he asked me to be his girlfriend. I said, well, I don't even know what it's like to kiss you. And he goes, oh, okay. I was like, that's your cue, and kissed him. It was kind of cute. I really can be an incredibly dumb guy about these sorts of things. Met her in the bar, lots of dancing together, drinks, her hand sitting on my thigh all the time as we sat. She asked me to walk her home, saying no one is home and she feels unsafe. I agree, in front of her home we stand there, she takes initiative and kisses me. I literally jump up because I was looking just past her face at this new Audi driving up the hill kinda half zoned out. I still feel so sorry for that girl. We hung out often. The last birthday of his was a hot day in July. I texted him, 95% of females who know better would be down for skinny dipping tonight. He responded, that activity sounds like it's lacking in morals. Me? Makes sense, I have few morals. Actual conversation between me and my now ex-boyfriend. I brought some new leopard skin undies. I can't wait for you to see them. I brought printer ink today. Dang it, story time from my perspective. Hindsight is 2020. At work with this girl, Kay. She comes to my house a lot. Spends time watching TV, joking around, snacking. I think just having fun together as friends because 1. I've never been in a relationship before, I was about 21 at the time, and 2. I was raised in a super conservative Christian home. Anyways, one day her best friend is hanging out with me and asking tons of questions about how I feel about Kay. You two are spending a lot of time together, are you gonna ask her out? Of course I respond with, how we're just friends, she shouldn't worry about it, blah blah. I'm so bad at hints, it's painful. Fast forward a week or so, Kay is over at my house super late and decides she isn't going home. She'll just sleep at my place. I insisted on sleeping on the couch. She was having none of it. I find a compromise and sleep in pajamas for the first time in more than 10 years, and sleep under the blanket, but not the sheets, so we're not actually touching. She gets super cuddly, and I roll over and go to sleep. In short, girl tries to get busy with me, and I just assume she's too lazy to drive home. I don't remember exactly when I clicked as to what had been going on. I just thought about it one day way later and my reaction was something along the lines of, damn, I was an idiot. She was a great girl and by the time I realized, we'd grown apart long since with her moving away. I said, I wanna F you, and he said, thanks. Although another time I texted a guy I wanted to sit on his face and 20 minutes later I was doing just that. You win some, you lose some, I guess. As a guy to whom this has been said, I actually responded with thanks too. At the spur of the moment, it was the first thing that came to mind that didn't sound like an outright rejection, but was an attempt to say, I take that as a compliment, but I do not reciprocate. Not my smoothest moment, but I thought it was slightly better than no thanks. Us guys aren't stupid, we're just scared of being hurt and tricked into embarrassment. And then sometimes just so gosh darn confused because this girl is so fine that you just assume she's just being mates, even though you're picking up all the signs and ignoring them, and then finally having the balls to confront her about it, just as you find out she gave a down-under kiss to your best mate because she got bored of you. This may or may not have happened to me. I kissed my now boyfriend a year before we started dating. He thought I slipped. Like, oops, I accidentally sucked on your face. It doesn't mean anything though. He didn't know I liked him until I showed up at his basic training graduation. I attempted to low-key ask him to prom. Had to be cool about it, you know, nice and smooth. My phrasing was something along the lines of, maybe you and I should go to prom together. It'd be more fun than going alone. His response was just, yeah, maybe, before he walked away. I took this as a rejection and immediately ceased all my other genius attempts at flirting, such as hugging, touching his hair, letting him carry my bag to the bus. He just kinda did it. I never made him and it became a daily routine for us, and smiling at him and other such things. I thought I was so subtle, but almost everyone else knew. I found out years later that he honestly had been clueless, and the reason he had grown distant with me is he thought I didn't like him back. There is no hope for us human beings. Also, if anyone was wondering why the answers are so weighted towards the woman's perspective, it's because the original submission question was about how clueless men can be as to women hitting on them. Personally, I feel like I've met women who were as clueless as some of these guys, but there you go. Here's one from the perspective of the man being hit on. I have a feeling that if she were a Redditor, a friend of mine would be on here talking about me right now. I've known her for about 4 years. I've always had a crush on her, but when I brought it up a few years back, she gave me a lukewarm response. I never mentioned it again. Then last night, she got to talking about reaching that age where you want something comfortable to settle into, and she kept throwing hints about me. As much as I adore this girl and have wanted to date her for a long time, I didn't like the way she worded everything. It wasn't like, there's someone I like and I don't know how to tell them. It was more like, I want a relationship, but I don't want to date strangers. I guess that's why I spend time with you. You're comfortable. I like how comfortable we are together, but I also need passion. So I joked my way out of the awkwardness. I'm sure she thinks I didn't catch her hints. I did. I just want her to be interested in me because I'm special to her and she appreciates me. Not because I'm good enough and she doesn't feel like trying harder, you know? Lots of girls that were my friends that I thought were dropping hints turned out like this. I've had 4 friends say that, if we're still single when we're 30, I'll go out with you then. I'm sorry, but screw that. No better way to ruin a friendship. I like you, but not enough to settle down while I'm still as hot as I am. Maybe after I've screwed all your friends, is how I hear it. Found someone who wanted me from the start, and we've been married almost 7 years now. I said I really care about you. He said, cool. He didn't get it. I said, no, I really care about you, like more than I care about most people. He said, oh, yeah, I like you too. We're now happily married. I find myself wondering when he will figure that out too. I used to sneak out and throw rocks at his window at night to let him come out and talk to me. Also used to organize friends' nights for the sole purpose of seeing him. Was a complete shock to him apparently when my friend drunkenly told him he was so blind to my crush on him. We've been dating for 6 years now. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. It's easy to dismiss this as he was clueless, but there's one alternative explanation. He just doesn't believe you could possibly like him and that it's some kind of mean practical joke that you and your friends will laugh about later. He actually thought I was serious? Yeah, low self-esteem is a B word. And yeah, I should have said at least one alternative, but I think the assumption here is that the guy is, in fact, interested, but he's missing the signals and has reasons why he's not taking the initiative. I never believed it was done for laughs, I just thought I couldn't possibly be the subject of their attraction. Like, what? Help me? Do you need a psych evaluation? This isn't normal. Amen. Listen to your heart, the brain is a butthole. Well, we were both really tipsy. She sat on my lap and said, I could never be with a guy like you, you're too nice. She was feeling my face and everything. I was confused. I had a rager and was sad at the same time. Snapchats with a deep neckline. So much chest visible. Wait, what if I get a Snapchat from a girl about her tan lines and she only has a towel covering the bits they censor on TV? As a girl, that's pretty hardcore flirting. My fiancé had no idea I was hitting on him before we started dating. After spending a day together with our college club, we returned to the campus and I asked him if he was free anytime the next week to hang out. He just said, "No, I'm really busy," which he maintains to this day was true. Then a few weeks later, I tried to get him to hang out again and I pretended to send a mass text to see who was in town for spring break. It was my night off, so I hoped he would respond. The next day he texts me, "Here," and that was it. I was convinced he didn't like me, but several of my friends told me to just ask him out. When I finally worked up the courage, I was so nervous that I wasn't my usual happy or goofy self. I told him I needed to talk to him, and he thought he had made me angry. He had no idea I was interested until I asked him out, and he was really happy when I did. We've been together almost 5 years now. Back in high school, I was very close to this girl who was in my friend group. Me and her did everything together, like go to the movies without the others in the group, go on lunch dates. She'd sleep over, we were basically a couple. I say basically because we all did this, but I wasn't dating her, or even tried, because I really thought she wasn't into me. But I mean, this girl literally would tell me things like, "I'd be happy if you were my first time," and she actually got undressed in front of me one day. I was just an extremely dense kid who assumed she was like this with all guys. On a happier note, I did end up dating her once I got to college, and we're still together now. The poor girl was probably so frustrated with you by the time you got the hint. She must really like you to have put up with that. In my defense, she later told me that when she would occasionally talk about guys to me, it was to try and make me jealous. Of course I was jealous, but I thought I had no right in judging who a friend liked. Sometimes we ignore your super obvious hints because we aren't interested. Sometimes we also ignore your super obvious hints because we're afraid of accidentally mixing up the signals and coming off as a creep. A friend told me she had a crush on a girl but didn't know if she was straight or not and couldn't figure out how to raise the subject. I gave her some mostly joking suggestions. I was the girl. It went so far over my head that I actually got jealous of the mystery girl. She's my girlfriend now and is still laughing about the fact that I was jealous of myself. Well, this one is a bit fairer than most of the others. It's hard to work out if someone bats for your team if you've only seen them date the opposite one, or haven't seen them date at all. I can understand them testing the waters a bit first, plus you gave jokey answers. Can you blame her? I'm the guy whose head it went over. After my first real date ever, though at the time I wasn't sure if it was a date, when I was 19 at the movies, I took her home. I offered to walk her to her door like a sir. When we're up there, she tells me I didn't have to do that, and I reply with something like, well, sometimes I like to pull out the old-school, traditional moves. She turns away from the key in her door, takes a slight step towards me and says, well, do you know any more of those traditional moves? I fricking bow, tip my fricking hat, and fricking say something corny like, I had a lovely time tonight, madam. I didn't realize what I'd missed until I was halfway home, and I scared the people besides me at the light because I was screaming at the top of my lungs and pounding the dashboard. Telling that story still makes me mad at myself all these years later. I mean, I just kissed him because he wasn't taking any hint. Take control. If he likes you, it's a sure winner. I was part of an investigation into infidelity. I can't really go into detail about it, but the gist is that Jane Doe was cheating on her husband in the military with some other guy, Steve, on base. Or she was trying to. Suffice to say, that guy wasn't too bright. I mean, I met the guy, and Steve wasn't all there. Some say he knew and was trying to dissuade her, knowing she was married, but due to some other stuff I can't divulge, he probably just didn't have a fricking clue. Sweet guy, good man, but dumb. Jane was really trying to take advantage of his stupidity, his muscle, and getting nowhere. Reading the details in the text messages and so on was hilarious. I'm going to paraphrase some of them here. I want to run barefoot through the fields with you. I grew up in Oklahoma. Those fields have cow pies. Gross. I can see my reflection in your eyes. It's the glasses. Run away with me. Take me into your arms. I have guard duty. My CO would have my butt. I want that butt. No, my CO is always telling me my butt is his. Huh? Have you ever wondered what true love is? Ever want to experience romance and deep desire longing in winds of destiny? No. I'm so lonely. I want movies when I'm lonely. They got a theater on base. I think it's showing Titanic and Goonies. I want to be the rose to your Jack. My name is Steve. What do you think when you look up at the stars? I'm outside. I want you. I want you so bad. I know how that is. I want a good burger. But the ones they have here on base, the grill is only open till 8 and it's like 11. Oh my god, I want a burger so bad. What are you doing? Texting on Judy. What are you doing now? Texting on the pot. What are you doing after Judy? My CO caught me texting. Oh god, Steve. This question makes me sad because I never get a hint from any girl. Or perhaps you never noticed you received the hints from the girls. One time this girl who I knew had a crush on me somehow got my number and called me. She told me she liked me. I hung up the phone. Back when we had just met, my husband missed many of my extremely obvious and unsubtle hints. I'd say things like, you should stay here and sleep with me tonight, and he'd say, oh no, I'm not tired yet, I'll just go home so you can sleep. Turns out he was super conscious of me being 17 instead of 18, he was in his early 20s. Once I turned 18, he suddenly became aware of all my not very subtle advances. Band trip to Universal. I'd purposefully chosen his group to walk around with and stayed mostly just hanging out with him. Always tried to sit next to him on rides that required the group to split. Second day of the trip, we went to the second park. We all got butterbeer and I didn't get a straw, so it was all over my top lip. He says, if you were any other girl, I'd be all smooth and like, here, let me help you with that and kiss you. But I don't think you're like that. I blush and say, well, how do you know I'm not like that? No response. I sat next to him on the bus ride to and from Universal, even took home the stuffed dinosaur he won, and I'm pretty sure I brought him and his friend cheesecake, all while he was pining over some other girl. Apparently our friends were making bets on how long it would take us to get together. Took him a few weeks, but that's my boyfriend, everyone. Hi, sweetheart. I asked a guy if he'd bring some Xbox original games for us to play. In short, it was code for, we're going to bang. He brought over a big bag of games and we played them. I remember one was Time Splitters, which I freaking loved and wish I still had the means to play. I didn't tell him my original plan until a couple of years after we'd started going out. He was just so frickin' cute, all super stoked that I wanted to game with him. I remember he came over a little later than planned because he'd been carefully selecting which games to bring. I married that goober. That is the worst "we will bang" hint in the fricking world. Really? That's what it's code for? Oh my god, all of my male friends want to do the deed with me. We would always hang out after classes on our own, and I'd rest my head against his chest or lap, depending on whatever was comfiest, when we'd watch movies. I'd play with his hair a lot. I even kissed him on the cheek once. He had no idea. Oh wow, having read this thread, I think a dear friend might be into me. Oh crap. Gorgeous Russian blonde sat next to me in the study hall for a year in high school. Every day we'd push our desks together and playfully kick each other under the desk, hide each other's stuff and do homework together. After I moved states, she berated me for how oblivious I was. In my defense, I was a lanky nerd with low self-esteem. Some of us are very good at rationalizing away hints that we've noticed. For example, I've literally been making out with a girl who told me she is only physical when there's a meaning, then a day later convinced myself it didn't mean that she liked me. Talking on Facebook, I mentioned a new bar near where I worked, and he said he'd never heard of it. I said they had really good Bloody Marys. He said he didn't like mixed drinks. Then I read a Reddit thread about guys, when have you realized too late that she was flirting with you, and realized he had no clue that I wanted to go out for drinks. So I messaged him again and was more blunt about it. We're now married and expecting our second boy any day now. What did you do that unintentionally destroyed someone's life completely? When I was about 8 years old, I was playing golf with another friend. I went for a swing and ended up splitting his jaw into like 10 parts or so. He now speaks a little bit odd 15 years later. I introduced my then roommate to Final Fantasy XI, dropped out of his full-ride scholarship, and dedicated his life to that game. I've known a lot of people who have their entire lives revolve around MMOs, myself included. They can be just as damaging to a person as substances if not careful. Addiction doesn't need an external chemical component. Sometimes the chemical releases from our brains while doing certain activities is enough to cause real addiction. Gaming addiction is as real as gambling and shopping addiction. But I also think someone has to have some issues to begin with for the addiction to be able to take hold. There was obviously something this person was trying to escape from before they were introduced to the game. Happy people don't develop life-destroying addictions. So you know that guy, Count Dankula, who taught his pug to be a far-right extremist and is now facing hate crime charges? I know I'm probably not really the cause, but I posted his video to Reddit because I found it on YouTube with a few thousand views. Then it sort of went viral on Reddit and ended up with millions of views. The attention it got caused him to be arrested for hate crimes, and now he potentially faces years in prison and difficulty finding a job ever again if found guilty. I know it probably would have still gone viral if I didn't post it here, eventually, but I can't help but feel a bit guilty for being the one who first posted to Reddit. Hope the poor guy doesn't get charged. A new guy at my old job, Bill, was bragging about his hot new girlfriend, Cassie. At our college party before we went on leave for 2 weeks, I saw him with a very pretty blonde just kinda standing around. Since he was new, I decided to help break the ice, show them around and meet some people. I walk over, introduce myself, say hi to Bill and then say, "And you must be his girlfriend, Cassie. He's told us some great things about you." He goes as white as a ghost. "No, I'm his wife, Rachel." I didn't know what to do, so I made an excuse that I must have mixed them up with another couple, and made my escape. They got divorced a couple of months later. You know what? I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Bill absolutely had that one coming. He really set himself up for marital self-destruction in multiple stages, and we only have to feel bad for Rachel for not getting out sooner. Pat, the alcoholic regular at the truck stop I used to work night shifts at. He used to come in every night for a bottle of Rumplemans before heading home. He was clearly a drunk, but a friendly and good-natured one. One day, he stopped coming in and nobody saw him for over a year. Then during my last week on the job, he comes in to get gas, and I'm so glad to see him that I brought his traditional bottle of booze for him as a gift since I was leaving. 6 months later, I learned that he disappeared for that year to cut his ties to the area, and moved to the West Coast to sober up and get his life together. He'd managed to kick the booze and start rebuilding his life when he came back to town to pick up some things from his old home before leaving the area forever. He was on his way out of town toward a new life when I gave him that bottle. He relapsed and self-deleted a few months later. Not to sound callous, but I've never really felt guilty about it. There's no way I could have known, and I'm sure there were other factors. I do feel sadness, though, that the world lost a good-hearted man who was struggling with his own demons. I am an alcoholic. Most likely he'd already relapsed in his brain. Most people don't relapse when they're sober and are handed a bottle of alcohol. He'd probably been struggling for weeks or days, or had been planning on moving so he could drink without people knowing. Even if you didn't give him a bottle, he probably would have just bought his own eventually. Alcoholism is a pretty crappy disease. My parents. I came from an upper middle-class family, so my parents paid for everything while I was in college. Housing, tuition, groceries, everything. I had my dad's credit card, and at 20 I started going out to the bar and spending lots of money. They continued to support me, to pay for everything, and I continued to take full advantage for years while ignoring their threats that they would shut off the credit card, which they never did. Then my dad sent me a heartbreaking email one day that said I'd spent all of his retirement money and they were struggling to pay the mortgage. It absolutely broke my heart and I cry just thinking about it. It ruined my relationship with my parents. It's been a few years and I'm making quite a bit of money now. Our relationships are better than they've ever been. At any opportunity I can, I send them money and will continue to do so until they tell me to stop. I'll forever be indebted to them for everything they've done for me, and I'll do anything I can to help them live comfortably for the rest of their lives, because that's what they've done for me. To those who grow up in a loving family, don't ever forget how much your parents love you. Don't ever take it for granted like I did. The one that I'm now trying to unscrew up is my kids' dental health. I spent a few years caring more about pills than I did taking my kids to the dentist or just brushing regularly. Now, when I have to take a kid to the dentist to repair the cavities and/or root canals that I caused them to need, I feel really bad and admit I effed up, and now they're paying for me messing up their lives even in just this one way. When I was 6 years old, I was running around a portable classroom at school while some other older kid was running around in the opposite direction for his own reasons. Our paths converged at the corner and we smashed heads. My forehead was split wide open and I got 13 stitches and still have a straight line scar in the middle of my forehead to remember it by. The other kid, being a few years older and a few inches taller, wasn't so lucky. His eyeball ruptured. I can still hear his screams. I tracked him down on Facebook all these years later to ask if he'd ever want a beer with me, and his response was pretty much, "Yeah, nah, I'm good." I introduced a friend to anime and watched Madoka with him. Ever since then, he's developed a very particular interest for younger anime girls and spends most of his time watching more anime and splurges heavily on figurines, amongst other things. By sophomore year of college, I'd figured out a pretty good rhythm for partying really hard while still getting good grades. At the beginning of the semester, a friend of a friend joined our group. He was a freshman, super smart and also extremely straight edge. He had never drank or had ever really been to a party. None of us pressured him into anything, just invited him to join us. But he started getting into the college party vibe pretty quickly. I guess I just assumed everyone had the same work ethic towards school as me. Even though I went out a lot, like a lot, I still studied every night and never missed assignments. But apparently my new friend didn't get quite as good a rhythm. He started to miss class more and more, went out more and more, and forgot about major projects, amongst other blunders. He ended up failing his first semester of college, and last I heard of him, he joined the military and shipped out overseas. No clue where he ended up. I'll say it doesn't seem so much like he ruined his life as he just didn't try to find the right balance to make himself succeed at school. And joining the military wasn't necessarily a bad thing for him. I know at least one person who was a bit of a screw-up before they joined the armed forces and really got their life together after their service, and even went back to finish their education in a path they knew they wanted to do once they'd had some more time to think and some savings. It was middle school and we were taking one of those state-based tests. I don't really remember the name, but it was the history portion. Our history teacher wasn't the nicest woman and she wasn't fair, so no one was really thrilled to be in her class that day. I remember sitting down, carrying my backpack and tossing it to the side. I was in a bad mood, so I just kind of threw it down, not really caring about it. I just wanted to get this test over with and then take a nap, because they made us put our head down when we're done. 20 minutes into the test and I'm blazing through it. I do love history, so I had no problem, despite our mean teacher. And she was walking along each aisle, checking each person, making sure nobody was cheating. One kid already was yelled at, so we were afraid to look up. I saw her shadow appear from the side, slowly walking down the aisle. Afraid to look up, I stared at my paper, but a scream next to me spiked my head up. "Ah!" She wailed as her elderly body went flying, her body landing on the ground with a big whomp. She had tripped on my backpack. I looked down in shock. "I can't get up! I can't get up!" She wailed on the ground. I was frozen in fear when a teacher's aide ran to her aid. "Go get the principal! Everyone out of class!" she yelled. We were all rushed into the hall, more teachers arrived, and then the principal. An ambulance came there, as there was a hospital close by, and then she was taken away. "Did you trip the teacher?" John tripped the teacher." It spread like wildfire. I was suddenly the kid who'd tripped the teacher. The next day we had a substitute, and the principal in the class with us as we were about to finish the tests. "This is why you're supposed to tuck your backpacks under your desk, not in the aisles." I never got in trouble for it, and it was never pushed to my family. We got a replacement teacher who was actually really cool, and history became a lot more fun again. I learned later our history teacher did come back. She'd damaged her arm and hip permanently, needing a walker. She was getting medically retired, but came to say hello to some old students. I never saw her, but one of my best friends did. The teacher commented on, "It's important to forgive, especially those who've wronged you." And she stared directly at my best friend at this time, knowing she and I were close. The history teacher left the school that day, never to be seen again. In short, historical progress goes whomp. So a lot of arguments are seeming to pop up, so I want to say this. This was about how I unintentionally messed up someone's life, not how they messed themselves up next to me. I left the backpack there and she got hurt. She didn't deserve what happened to her, even as much as I didn't like her. In my mind, it's still both funny and horrifying to me, even after almost 2 decades. So don't be that kid. Tuck away your bag. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Introduced my classmate to League of Legends last year. Since then, he stopped showing up to school for weeks at a time and then he dropped out. And now he has no plans to do anything but play League all day, every day. My best mates when we were 14 and 15. He was a typical rich kid whose parents paid for whatever he wanted. He was pretty spoiled, but he also understood that you have to work to get things. His dad taught him well. Well anyway, I got some green herb off of another guy in school and gave him his first session, and after that we were smoking all the time. He moved back up north not long after and hit the hard stuff, and is now smoking a lot of crystal. I know it's not completely my fault, but I can't help but think if I hadn't given him that session, he would never have got into the heavier substances. According to my ex-wife, I single-handedly ruined her life. Seems to me that if you have a lesbian affair and then empty the bank account before filing for divorce, and my lawyer gets the courts to make you pay me a lot of money, you may have some responsibility in your own demise. Back in the day, I had an extra beta key for City of Heroes, an MMO, which I gave to a friend. He met some girl in the game and they hit it off. Problem was, she was extremely needy and slightly crazy. Told him he doesn't need friends since he's got her. And besides, we're all bad influences anyway. So they broke contact and moved to a new city. More than 15 years of friendship gone. If I'd never given him the beta key, he would never have met her. Probably. There's a lot of people in this group of stories feeling terrible for something that's only really partially on them, where someone else ultimately made the fatal decision. There was as much of a chance of him meeting this person as there were chances of meeting an equally terrible person in any other social forum, real life or online. It was just a freak chance that he met them in the thing you gave him. Your friend and this woman did all the destroying themselves. I can't blame myself too much, but this is all pretty recent, so I feel a little responsible. My best friend growing up used to have his grandpa take us home every day together. In high school, my best friend growing up dated this girl. They dated roughly 2 to 3 weeks and then ended it, so it wasn't very serious at all. Over a year later, I somehow ended up getting close to her and asked my friend if it was okay because of their previous relationship. He said it was fine and to go for it. Well, I did, and he didn't take it too well, but didn't really show it. Me and him had naturally grown apart at this time, and we're still good friends, just didn't hang out together daily. He was a bigger kid, but after that, he started losing weight like crazy. Then, not long after, the remains of his father's body were found. He took this really hard, obviously. We grew completely apart and I continued dating this girl through high school until we broke up senior year. He couldn't handle seeing us around each other, so we pretty much stopped talking altogether. Freshman year of college, though, we reconnected and spent some time together. It started becoming more frequent, and he was coming to parties with me and we'd hang out at his house. Around this time, though, I reconnected with this girl. We had some time apart, and getting back together at our age, we were taking it seriously. My friend didn't disappear this time, but I did notice he'd slowly been drinking more. He was already drinking heavily before we got back together, but I thought it was just like all of us college kids were doing. We all drank, smoked, and generally did nothing if it wasn't schoolwork. One night, though, I went to his house and noticed it was a bit much. I watched him drinking full glasses of gin and eventually blacking out in the backyard. I moved him to his bed and his girlfriend watched him all night. This was the last time we talked and he removed all communication with me. Years go by and I tried to reach back out. Him and his girlfriend had a kid but broke up. He had blocked me on Facebook, and if I tried to text or call, he just wouldn't answer. Time just kept going, and I always thought about him. 3 weeks ago, I got a call that he'd pulled out a piece and self-deleted in his driveway. You can't help but wonder what you could have done or how much you contributed. I wish I'd reached out. I don't think just the girl coming between us was the sole reason at all, but he had said to his ex that he'd thought about self-deleting before. He said he couldn't do anything right and he didn't have anyone to turn to. His life didn't go how it should have at all. He was top of our class and had such potential, but decided to go to a smaller school at home. He failed out and stopped going while the rest of us moved on with our lives. I wish I would have tried more. Incredibly stupid coworker sent an email to my business account calling in sick. Unfortunately, I was sick that day too and her husband was my stand-in. He read that mail and called a divorce lawyer because his wife had left the house as usual. When she came home from work, her lover's bed, her husband had already organized a removal company. Sorry, not sorry, cheaters deserve the worst and she destroyed her own life. What I did was completely unintentional though. Chatting about people in relationships and whatnot with my colleagues. Chill conversation, friendly banter, then said something about another colleague apparently being with another colleague. I was given such a weird look. A boss asked me where I'd heard that, to which I replied another colleague who was on sick leave at the time because of surgery. They nodded knowingly and we began talking about the weather or something. The colleague on sick leave was fired because they weren't supposed to tell people about the other two being together apparently. My workplace has a good reputation in the industry and our boss has a lot of connections. If they attempt to get a job in the industry anywhere in the future, they're going to get a less than stellar review from the boss, and will probably have an extremely difficult time finding a job. Whoops. I guess you could describe him as the trenchcoat kid of my middle school. Let's call him Bob, because I don't want to keep referring to him as trenchcoat kid, it just feels wrong. Bob was a pretty troubled kid and was picked on quite a bit by people. One day our class was at a nearby park for a kind of relaxing field trip after midterms. Some of my friends and I were being dumb kids and sword fighting with sticks. I didn't know that Bob was nearby watching us, and during our sword fighting, I swung the stick around behind me trying to be cool. Turns out, I accidentally hit Bob with it and it was his last straw before breaking. He tackled me from behind and started choking me until I lost consciousness. I was told that one of my friends tried to pull him off while others went to grab the teacher but couldn't get him off me even after I was out cold. He was expelled and sent to a juvenile correctional facility for what basically amounted to attempted murder. I have no idea what happened to him since then, but I wonder how his life would have turned out if he'd gotten help instead of shipped off like a criminal, all because I was being dumb and accidentally hit him with a stick. Well, this definitely rates with the title based on the accidental and unfortunate placement of events, but it does sound like something of this nature was going to happen at some point, and at least in this case Bob wasn't alone with someone. Neither you nor Bob died. Sad, but probably for the best his imminent outburst happened in a public place. Only sad that he never got to therapy or something before it happened. I'm sure it's not 100% my fault, but I think I had a hand in ruining my parents' marriage. My brother and I refused to sleep anywhere but our parents' bed. Like for an extremely long time. Years. Eventually, my dad started sleeping in my bed and I slept where he slept, next to my mum. This went on for like 2 years. I know they had other problems, but now that I'm a husband and father, I understand how important intimacy is to a marriage. It really helps keep those lovey-dovey feelings rolling. I can't help but think that if they could have shared a bed, there's a good chance they would have been able to work out their other issues. I think they know that too. And yeah, I also understand that they were the parents and I was the kid and they should have told me to F off and sleep in my own bed. I was in high school when this happened, about 4 years ago. I had this classmate, let's call him Kevin, who was quiet and normally kept to himself. Others sort of found him weird, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary with him from my perspective. One afternoon during one of our classes, I see that there's a USB lying under Kevin's chair. At this point, I didn't know whether it was his or not, but I grabbed it anyway. Impulsively, I told my friend with the laptop to load up the USB and see what was inside. We didn't expect to find a crap ton of pictures of people in furry costumes doing the deed in there. Suddenly, Kevin comes bounding in, grabs the USB, runs back to his chair and buries his head in his arms. Turns out, he had certain interests. After that, he was known around our batch for being the weird guy who's into furry stuff. And he has no idea it was me who found his USB in the first place. Man, high school sucks. The older you get, the less anyone cares what twinks your wink. My friend's life and subsequently her family's. Our group of friends decided to just go out one night and party like crazy. We were just being dumb and doing stupid teenage stuff. We were all reckless and thought we were invincible. And then she passed away. While I won't go into extreme detail about what happened, I'll say it was alcohol. She had too much in her system and her body just shut down. I don't feel like it was solely my fault, but I do feel like I contributed to ruining her life because I was there and I was being just as irresponsible as everyone around me. I get physically ill when I see posts about her every now and then. It's even worse when I interact with her parents, which isn't often, and I know that it's terrible, but I can't bring myself to face them. I almost hurled when they were tearfully telling my friends and me stories of my friend's childhood and talking about the things they regretted with their parenting, as if them yelling at her over not cleaning her room or stuff like that while she grew up led to her passing away. Her friends were the worst thing to happen to her. Man, this is hard. My ex, just before we broke up, we were talking about smack and why people go to the lengths they do for it, and he said he'd find us some. It was my idea. Then we broke up. After a while, he called me and said he'd found some. Would I like to come over? I declined because I quit and was only a few months clean from substances at that point. He ended up using it and is now a full-blown addict. This makes me incredibly sad. I've turned my life around, and he wouldn't have brought the stuff if I'd kept my mouth shut. I heard from a mutual friend a while back. She said he lost all of his teeth and his hair is falling out. He was such a great guy, but that stuff ruined him. What unforgivable thing have you done that you'll never tell anyone about? I grew up very poor with dysfunctional parents in a rural area. My siblings and I often went hungry. As the oldest, I always tried to look after them, but one day I failed hard. When I was 7 and my little brother was 5, I was playing outside and he appeared with a bologna sandwich that he had somehow scraped together from what he could find in the kitchen. It was just a single piece of meat on 2 squished pieces of dried bread. No cheese, no condiments, nothing else. When I saw what he had, in a fit of jealousy, I knocked it out of his little fingers onto the ground. He immediately burst into tears and started bending down to pick it up off the ground. Before he could pick it up out of the dirt, the local pack of stereotypical dogs that a poor rural family keeps pushed him over and ate the sandwich. He just lay there on the ground, covered in dust, crying and repeating over and over, "I made it to share with you." I'm now 30 and we have a close relationship, but not a day goes by that I don't think about what I did on that one day out of petty jealousy. I want to apologize, but I really am hoping that he does not or will not remember it. In short, I destroyed the food of my sibling in a starving situation. Update: I talked to him this weekend while working on our cars. He said he didn't remember it. He made such light of the situation that I couldn't even start to explain how sorry I was about it without seeming overly dramatic. I do feel better though. Thanks everyone for talking me into getting this off my shoulders. My best friend and his father were in an accident 5 years ago. We were both 16. His dad was declared dead at the scene and he ended up in a coma for 12 weeks. I spent a lot of time at the hospital and his house and as a result, with his mum. A couple of weeks after the accident, she just broke down completely as she was driving me home from the hospital. She told me she couldn't be alone that night and begged me to stay with her for a couple of hours. We went back to the house and she poured me a glass of wine. I lost my innocence to her. While my friend's life was hanging in the balance and his dad just buried, I was doing the deed with his mum. I'd always had a thing for her. I mean, she was my friend's hot mum. So I obliged every time she instigated, which was a lot. This stopped immediately after he was released from hospital, and we avoid each other now. When we were 10, my best friend and I were always bullied by this kid who lived in our complex. He was one of those sneak bullies too, who acted so lovely around adults, but was a holy terror when they weren't around. So one day, after he held my friend down and made him eat dog poop, we hatched a plan to put him out of commission. We found a Windex bottle and filled it with a bunch of different cleaning agents, one of them being bleach. Then we went looking for him. When we found him, he asked my friend if he was still hungry and wanted some more, and then he came over to us. I squirted him right in the face with the bottle, a few good squeezes worth. He ended up going to the hospital with chemical burns and lost all of the sight in one eye and partial sight in the other. He Facebooked me a few years back and apologized for how he treated us and actually thanked me for what we did to him. He said it was a real eye-opener. His pun, not mine. And he now works exclusively with blind children and says it's incredibly rewarding. Good God! The narrator can tell that this is going to be one of those absolutely harrowing videos to make already, given that the last story is the closest thing we have to wholesome content. Yikes! I'm a big guy, 6'2", 280 pounds, bearded. I was walking through the mall one day and went to hitch up my pants. I chose to do that, however, at the exact time that a small Hispanic woman was walking by with her baby in her arms. I accidentally elbowed that baby right in the face. The woman very timidly said, "Oh, lo siento," and ran off in the opposite direction. I was walking downtown one night after leaving the bar around midnight-ish, and I had to walk a few blocks to my car. Parking is awful in the city on a Friday night. Well, halfway there wasn't anyone around. Someone came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder and told me to give him my wallet or it would be bad, as he had his hand deep in his pocket. I don't really know if he had a piece on him, but all I could think about was getting stabbed or shot, which I really didn't want to go through. So I preempted him, reached for my wallet, and grabbed my knife, put my hand in his face and stabbed him in the stomach 3 times and ran as hard as I could for probably a mile. Never told anyone, never called the cops, as it seemed like that would put me in a worse spot. No idea what happened to him. In short, probably shanked a guy to death. My half-sister, who lived with her father in another state, died of a brain tumor when I was 17 and she was 15. The tumor pressed on her vocal cords, causing her voice to be very high-pitched and breathy. For the last 6 months of her life, I refused to speak with her on the phone because her voice reminded me of her, at the time, untreatable condition and, at the time, inevitable end. This was in 1987 and I still hate myself for it. In short, blew off my dying sister, who I loved very much because I was too scared to speak to her. I was 11 years old. I asked my grandma, who was raising me, to buy me an Oreo McFlurry from Dairy Queen while she was running errands. She didn't want to because it was out of her way. I persisted and she continued to say no. 2 hours later, she came back and stopped her car at the end of the driveway and paused for a while, like she was going to back up and do more errands. I came out to see what was up, and she rolled the window down and handed me an Oreo McFlurry with the biggest smile on her face. I took said McFlurry and threw it down on the lawn because I was a hyper prick and was annoyed that she had said no earlier. I remember her smile going to a what the frick face after I threw it. She died of terminal illness a year later. I'm 24 now, and to this day that's my saddest memory ever. She chose to raise me after she had already brought up her own kids and was the best person ever. I'm so sad this is the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about her. P.S. As you can tell, I'm a piece of crap. I miss you, my mum. Sorry. Living abroad in Australia, I did the deed with my German co-worker who had a boyfriend. She was in the country for 3 years on a domestic partnership visa and only had to stay for 6 more months to get full permanent residency. When her boyfriend found out, he broke up with her and alerted immigration, he was her visa sponsor, and she was deported back to Germany. In short, I screwed my co-worker and screwed her by getting her deported. I was walking in a big city in an area unfamiliar to me in an evening this summer, a few hours before sundown. It was in a residential area, about a 20-minute walk from the city centre. There wasn't a whole lot of people on the street and only a little bit of traffic. Now, onto the actual event. As I walk, a car drives by me and turns in on a street I just passed. The car was going faster than was safe, and I heard a young woman screaming something from the half-open passenger door. I think, crazy jerks to myself, and kept walking, as did everyone else who was out. It was only later that night when I thought back on it that I realized something. That woman had screamed, "Help." I was mortified. The fact that neither I nor anyone else on the street did a single thing to help her made me feel ill. As far as I know, no one checked up on the situation. No one called the cops, no one did anything. The worst thing is, I have no idea what happened to the girl. She could have been a victim of a kidnapping for all I know. Frick. I was climbing a tree with my friend when we were in first grade. I was the better tree climber as he was sort of an inside all the time kind of kid. For some reason, I thought it would be awesome to pee from the top of the tree. While peeing, I thought it would be awesome to pee on him. So I did. At laser tag, I accidentally knocked down a little girl when we collided while rounding a corner. Instead of helping her up, I shot her for the points and ran away. I mean, I think up until the age of 25, I would have been right there with you. Little kids are bouncy, they were probably fine. I mean, yeah, you were terrible, and yeah, I'm laughing. This is something right off a script page of Always Sunny in Philadelphia. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Just a few months ago, I went on a road trip with the wife and kids. On the way back, my son made us take an emergency potty break. When I got out to get him out of the car, I found a wallet on the ground. I picked it up, got it in the car, and opened it up. It had several credit cards, SS card, bank card, DL, $879 in cash, and several other items. I looked the guy up on Facebook and sent him a friend request with a message saying I found his wallet. Fast forward about 2 weeks, don't hear from him, contact his relatives, they have him call me. The guy wants me to bring it to him, a 1.5 hour ride away. I tell him it's not possible, I'm too busy. He says, "That's effed up, bro." I say, "Sorry, but I can meet you halfway this weekend." Guy says, "Cool." He then tells me he doesn't remember how or when he lost it because he was fricking hammered. Fast forward to the weekend, I arrive at the location he's decided on and I wait for him for over 30 minutes. He finally calls and says, "My bad, bro, I was at the bar with my friends and forgot about you. I'll be there in about 10 minutes. 45 minutes later, he shows up, walks up to me, and says, "1 second, bro, I've got to take a leak." He's obviously intoxicated, makes me wait while he goes in to pee. For some reason, my inner voice said, "Frick this guy." So I took the money out of the wallet. Just seconds later, he walks up and I hand him his wallet. He says, "Thanks," snatches it from my hand and leaves. I don't feel bad at all about this. Not one bit. In short, found a guy's wallet, he was a jerk, I took his $879. I feel good about it. Who the frick carries around almost $1,000 in cash, and then doesn't even check to see if it's still there? I wouldn't kill the person I loved. She was a day from the end of her life. A virus had eaten her liver, and she went yellow. Her liver couldn't filter out water anymore, so her lower half was swelling up. This meant she couldn't move her legs, and she used to be a ballet dancer. She had a Hickman line, which is a tube that connects to an artery in the chest. It's used for putting chemotherapy into the bloodstream. She decided to cut through the tube so that she would bleed to death. She did that, looked at me, and said, "Why isn't it working?" It failed because of blood pressure. If she was lying down, it would have worked. I closed up the end of the tube. I knew she was dying. I knew she was going to suffer another day, but I wouldn't let her die. I even thought to myself, you'd be better off dead, and I was too selfish to let her go. She was always brave, and she chose to die on her own terms. But I'm a coward, and I made her suffer because I'm weak. This was about 20 years ago, so it's been a while. I grew up in New York. The school I went to had about 3 white kids, 2 Hispanic, and 2,300 or so black students. I was one of the white kids. I was a typical inner-city child, listened to punk, skateboarded, and all that. I got jumped a lot. To the point where I eventually left school, but this story is one of the reasons I left. So there were twins at this school, let's call them John and Shantae. They always picked on me. I guess I had a mohawk and liked the dead Kennedys enough to lump me with the skinheads. So all of the white kids at school were labeled as skinheads, even though none of us were. I was standing in front of my locker getting books, and both of them snuck up behind me. I felt a really hard slap on the side of my head where it was shaved, and the pain was actually pretty intense. I turned around to fight whoever just hit me, only to see these two and about 15 other kids. The principal was standing on the other side of these kids with a smirk on his face. I could do nothing except mutter, "You'll get yours, alone." It was later on that day when I got my chance. I saw John walking toward the stairs. It was a 3-story school and we were on the top floor. I lost all self-control as the anger hit me and I ran at him full speed. I actually jumped and hit him with both feet in his back, and the back of his head right as he hit the top of his stairs to go down. He flew the entire 15 stairs or so and hit his head on the wall. He was completely knocked out. I could faintly hear the screams as I flew down the stairs to him. People were telling me to stop, even though I spent many years getting my butt handed to me by these guys and never being able to fight them one-on-one. This was my chance. I hit the landing where his body was lying and I jumped in the air and landed both feet on his head. The sound is something I'll never forget. From what I understand, he had surgery from that. I ended up in a boys' home as well because of it. But to this day, I feel incredibly crappy that I did this to him. It just goes to show what can happen if you spend so long taking crap from people and not having adults who are willing to intervene. Before you say I'm absolutely terrible for this happened 2 years earlier. I'd been skating home with some friends, we were on the road, and who walks out of a store but the twins? They see me and my friends, and the first thing John, the one I drop-kicked, does is throw a full Snapple bottle at me. It hit me right in the nose and shattered the bridge of it. They actually ran while my friends scrambled to chase them down and see if I was alright at the same time. My childhood was a mess. Cue all of us who were ever bullied rating the severity of our treatment against this guy. He had it worse than I think I ever did. I think the absolute worst part is the school principal actively smiling at the ongoing treatment of one of his students. What a worthless educator. Hopefully the author and John both recovered and went on to be better people. I don't know what else you can say about that. While my uncle was dying in a hospice unit, I was cranking it next to him. It was my turn to stay for the night, I was bored, and I had a laptop with a decent Wi-Fi connection. And one thing led to another. After I cleaned up, I noticed the room was really quiet and checked his pulse and called the nurse to tell him he had finally passed away. I still feel terrible. Oh god, that poor uncle.
And as I ascended into the clouds, I looked back on my earthly body, and there was my nephew pumping his hog.
I banged my ex-girlfriend of 3 years for around 6 months while she was engaged. We'd been broken up for about 3 years at this point too. She, quote, needed to make sure she didn't love me anymore. And my wang was in control. 5 out of 10 wouldn't engage in adultery again. I was at Dave & Buster's heading back to my friends with a huge mug of beer in my hands. An oblivious little girl runs right towards me, her head equally level to my mug. I barely avoid spilling a good splash of beer in the process. I yell, "Hey!" and turn around to further chastise the little girl. She looks back at me and trips, falling. Then, wham! The little girl that was chasing the first girl runs smack into my mug. The whole thing empties onto her head. 2 little girls are on the floor crying hysterically, one drenched in beer. Their parents were there in a flash, and the first thing that came out of my mouth is, "You guys owe me a new beer." Frick places that mix a bar scene with Chuck E. Cheese. When I was 6 years old, my buddy and I decided to put a boulder on a seesaw and see if we could make it catapult. We were 6 years old, darn it. I was a weak kid and couldn't get a proper grip on it. I accidentally dropped it and my friend's hands got caught underneath the boulder on cement ground. He started screaming and I got scared, so I just ran away. He stayed like that for a few hours. Okay, here we go. This still torments me to this day. When I was 13 years old, my parents took me to buy a hunting slingshot. I also bought a bunch of large metal ball bearings to shoot. My parents kept the real ammo and told me I wasn't allowed to play with the slingshot when they weren't home. So 15 minutes after we got home, they both left for a few hours. My brother and his friend and I immediately went and took the slingshot out of their room, but couldn't find the ammo. Our house was built on an old hazelnut farm, so there were hazelnut trees around the entire property and a lot of squirrels. We started picking up the nuts that the squirrels dropped out of the trees and started shooting things in the yard. Then, sure enough, the squirrel came down on a really low branch while my brother's friend had a nut ready to shoot. We hadn't been able to hit a single target the entire time we were outside. We sucked! So as a joke, I told my brother's friend to shoot at the squirrel that was 10 feet away. He pulled back and shot the squirrel right in the side of the head. It fell out of the tree and was paralyzed on the left side of its body, but it was kicking with the 2 feet on the right side and was spinning in a circle, making these horrible shrieking noises. There were blood bubbles exploding out of its nose, mouth, and eyeball at the same time. It was screaming this shrill, bloody murder noise, and it was my fault that it was writhing in horrendous pain. I swear to God I could feel the pain it was experiencing. I thought quick and realized I had to put it out of its misery, so I grabbed a big branch off the ground and started hitting the squirrel as hard as I possibly could. It wouldn't die. I was smashing the crap out of that little critter, and it took at least 8 to 10 hits to finally kill it. Once it was dead, I dug a hole and buried the little guy and apologized to it over and over, petting it and telling it I was so sorry. I'm 31 years old now, and after almost 20 years, I still get sick to my stomach every time I think about it. Frick, I suck. A number of years ago, I was addicted to white snow. Part of that addiction was selling it in order to support my own habit, which in itself was a pretty bad thing. However, I took it way further than that one weekend. I had just brought a large amount with the intentions of getting a hotel room at the local Six and hustling out there for the weekend. On the way there, I had a friend in the car with me and he recognized a girl walking and wanted to stop and say hi to her. I pulled over and they chatted a bit and he asked what she was doing. She told him she was on her way to a local area that was known for smack. I kind of laughed to myself because I knew I had the best white snow in the area. She asked what all that was about, so I asked her if she knew how to cook her own. She did, so I told her to hop in, no need for her to get ripped by a smack dealer, I had the best stuff in town. She jumped and we went on our way. My friend had already told me she was a smack working girl, and this got my white snow-fueled insane brain chugging along. When we got to the room, I sold her $10 worth, and she cooked it up and took the very first hit as soon as she could. I swear her eyes got as big as saucers, and she asked if I had enough to keep her going all weekend. I told her as long as she had the money, I could do it. I spent the next 2 days straight watching her buy a small amount, cook it up, smoke it up, leave and do her business, come back and buy a small amount, cook it up, and so on and so forth. I think I made about $2.5 grand off her that weekend while she sold herself out to anyone with $10 or more. I didn't do it because I needed to. I could have sold a larger amount to a few of my regular people and accomplished what I needed to do in order to get high all weekend for free. I just did it because I'd never done anything like that before and I wanted to know what it felt like. While it was happening, I was staying high, snorting. It was a pretty amazing feeling. Looking back on it now, I'm disgusted with myself. In short, rented out a smack working girl for a weekend because I could. I did the deed with a girl while her boyfriend was away at his father's funeral. To be fair, to me of course, she told me they'd broken up and I didn't know anything about the funeral, but I still felt terrible after I found out. Turns out the guy inherited 7 figures though, which he told the girl while dumping her. Dude hated me hard for years, understandably. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.